about 6:30 right now, so why don't we call the meeting to order? This is the regular board meeting of the Comfort Lake Forest Lake Watershed District for June 9th. And I think we have all our board members here, except is Chris here? I can't see on the screen. Bobby, can you tell me?
Yeah, President Schmaltz, I'm seeing that we are missing Manager Taves.
I saw him down below, I just thought.
I'm here.
Yeah,
Okay,
he's there.
everybody's here.
Okay, good. So we have a full quorum. We have more than a quorum. All the board members are present then. So I'd like to welcome Steve McComas also as a guest consultant for us tonight. First agenda item is setting the meeting agenda. And I think we've talked a little bit about trying to move the Eurasian milfoil discussion, which Steve McComas is involved, up to, I'm going to suggest maybe after a staff introduction. Is everybody comfortable with that?
Yeah, I am. Sounds good.
Jackie, do you think we should also move the community grant program up at the same time, or should we leave it where it is?
No, I thought it should be together, and I was going to suggest that. It's old business though, so I don't know how you want to handle that, but those two kind of go together in my mind.
So why don't we move them both up after staff introductions, and we'll try to deal with those right up front, since that's a timely issue also. Do we need a motion for that? I think we do, don't we?
I'll make a motion to approve the changes to the agenda.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Is that Doug? Okay, thank you.
Mr. President,
Okay, Bobby, would you then do a roll call vote, please?
Mr. President,
Yes.
we also have that July Avenue investigative scope of work to add to the agenda.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought that was already on. Okay.
Well, it's
So
listed, but it wasn't.
Jackie, can
it
you
wasn't
change your
posted.
amendment to add item E also?
Yes.
In,
Yes, I adjust my motion to include everything.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Bobby, you want to do a roll call vote, please?
Manager Schmaltz,
Aye.
Manager Anderson,
Aye.
Manager Taves,
Aye.
Manager Loaf,
Aye.
Manager Baki.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. Moving on then to new business. First, we have staff introductions. Mike, are you going to do that?
President. Yep, Mr. President, managers, like to introduce Beth Carino. She is our new senior program manager, but I'll just give Beth a couple of minutes to introduce herself. And she's been on for a whole week already, and I'm very excited about how aligned she is with the district's philosophy and understanding of our mission. So welcome, Beth.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for letting me join you this evening, especially to our Board of Managers. And thank you, Mike. My name is Beth Carino. I am so happy to join Comfort Lake Forest Lake Watershed District. I know some of you from my previous work at the Rice Creek Watershed District, and thought I'd share just in a minute or so a little bit more about me. I am a graduate of the University of Minnesota Twin Cities, but left shortly after graduation to begin my career in Kansas. And over the last few years, I've had opportunities to administer water rights throughout the state of Kansas, particularly in Western Kansas, where water is in short supply. I've done community planning and solid waste management planning and implementation, administered statewide grants programs, and even had the opportunity to be an education director at a botanic garden based on children's literature. So I have a diverse background that's given me a lot of fun experiences over the years that I'm really excited to put into use for Comfort Lake Forest Lake. So are there any questions?
Just welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's great to have you, Beth.
Thank you
Mhm.
so much.
Welcome on board.
Yes.
Okay,
All right,
thank
I'll hand it
you.
back to you.
Thank you. So now we'll move into the two items that have been moved up, the Eurasian water milfoil. Mike, do you want to introduce us, and then maybe we can have Steve talk about some questions that we've kind of prepared?
Or at the last board meeting, there was an initial discussion again for, I think more or less for the newer managers. The board has discussed EWM on a variety of past meetings. And the board had offered a few questions and trying to understand, the role of EWM as an invasive species. And then what does it look like with the district over the years? And, what are some potential costs? So staff and I put together a few items here along with some information about the district's, goals as out of the watershed management plan, kind of always coming back to that. And just overall, a little discussion about the funding considerations for EWM and, how does the board want to pursue its role in this element of lake management. So I think we're going to have some good discussion. Steve McComas has a lot of experience with it. And of course, I think we know that Comfort Lake Forest Lake has a history of being out in front on things and trying to be proactive. I think there's some pros and cons on how to be involved with this. And, just from a staff standpoint, I guess I would offer that there's a role for the district and all invasive species in terms of the management, but the extent of that role is really a policy level decision, by the board. So when there's a wide array of involvement that we could offer, either from the technical element, coordination with Steve McComas, et cetera, offering guidance, to further pursuing grants and funding mechanisms, and some of the items that are kind of in between. And I think that's where we're at, up for discussion this evening. So I know Manager Smalta, you had some questions, and maybe we can first start with if there's any questions on the memo itself, and then we can turn to the questions that you have.
Okay, I think Steve McComas probably has a lot of information on this, especially since Floridine is a new topic for most of us. It certainly is for me. So do we want to have Steve chime in on what he knows about the questions? We prepared some questions primarily to try to pull out the information that we think is most relevant to this situation. Or do you think, Mike, we should just jump into the memo?
Where are these questions? Are these questions that were prepared in advance, Steve?
Yes, we've looked at the issues that we're talking about here, and since Steve McComas was coming in, we thought it'd be most efficient to put together some at least beginning questions to give information to the board at a very basic level, and then let it go from there. So we get that information out in front of the board and then move from there, rather than trying to pull it out back and forth like we normally do. So
Do you
Bobby, do you have the?
Oh, I'm sorry.
We have a set of questions, Bobby. I like the questions without the answers if you have them. So Steve can just talk to that, or we can do it either way. Do you have a slide of the other, just the questions?
Probably not. This is what was requested. So I think this is where we're at.
Okay, that's fine. Steve, do you want to comment on the questions then? You've made some written replies already. That's fine too.
I'm sorry, one more question, Steve. Did you send that out to the managers? Do we have a copy of that in our inbox or something?
No, we just did it late this afternoon. So I thought it'd be just as a tool to guide the discussion, to shorten the meeting a little bit in terms of having us get the information out as quickly as possible, and then open it up for discussion for the board to take it wherever it wants to. These are the basic facts that Steve's going to present. And then if there's additional questions, we should move on from there, I think. Steve, do you want to maybe take each question?
Steve, you're still muted.
Yep, I'm sorry about that. Okay, I'm ready. So there were some questions here. I'll just give some bullet points.
I can't hear him. He's
Steve, you're
muted.
still muted.
Try it like that. How's that?
We can hear you.
Wow, so far so good.
Yep.
Well, I apologize.
Muted again. Oh, no.
Unmute. Did I, sorry. Dang it. What
We
the
can hear and
heck?
see it now.
Okay, is that better?
Yep,
Yeah,
you're
move the
good.
cursor away from the mute sign. I think that'd be a good start.
Okay, sorry about that. Anyway, I have some bullet points here, and it's not comprehensive, but it's just some background information. For example, fluoridone first used in Minnesota in about 1996 in Lac La Vanne. Lac La Vanne was not a registered lake of the state. Therefore, they didn't have to go through the permit process. The DNR did not allow fluoridone up until about 10, 12 years ago. But because Lac La Vanne was not a natural, didn't have a lake number, they used it when we tracked it. It wasn't very successful from the standpoint that we used too high of a concentration, killed a lot of plants. We did knock off milfoil, and we learned a lot from that. Since then, the dose of fluoridone, which is a lake-wide treatment, low concentration, but with a very long residence time. Sometimes you want 60, 70, 80 days of a low concentration of fluoridone to be in the lake for milfoil control. And at low concentrations, it is fairly effective at inhibiting or eliminating Eurasian water milfoil. So my experience, I've had surveys, I've been doing surveys on a number of lakes with fluoridone. I've gone to national meetings where this has been discussed. I've also talked with the DNR on a number of occasions. In fact, that Lac La Vanne study, we kind of worked in conjunction, and then also talked to applicators. So I'm pretty familiar with fluoridone as a tool for specifically Eurasian water milfoil control. The next question was, when is fluoridone normally used for control, and what are the guidelines? These are fairly subjective at this point, but it would seem that one, we want to use it to be most ecologically efficient, and then also economically efficient. So what happens is that in a lake with a low plant diversity, we do get some unintended consequences when we're treating for milfoil. Coontail and LAD are probably a couple plants that are also impacted with this treatment. So in a lake with low plant diversity, often coontail is present. We might be taking out not only the milfoil, but also coontail, and sometimes that can be a little bit detrimental. In lakes with high species diversity, we might have a problem. We might knock out some of the more rare species that are susceptible to these types of low concentrations of this herbicide with a long contact time. So that is one of the things to consider. And other than that, it is, how extensive is milfoil? Because this is a whole lake treatment, oftentimes, if we have a small percentage of the lake area with milfoil, we probably are not as apt to use fluoridone. It might not be the best candidate. So that's also another consideration. So the ecology and then the economics. Next up would be the risks. Are there any risks with such a decrease with water clarity or loss of native species? Wisconsin DNR, in a published paper, tracked 4 lakes that had used fluoridone, and they did find some loss of coontail, elodea, and some naiads. Those are native plants. Now, they did say they saw a decrease in water clarity, but that's not been the experience in Minnesota necessarily. The Floridone lakes that we're tracking, both myself and others, we're not really seeing a decrease in water quality from that standpoint. However, it is pretty consistent that we will either lose some distribution in abundance of coontail and elodea and naiads, and a couple of lakes, elodea has actually disappeared. So that's one consideration. But these are perennial plants, plus there's a seed bank. So eventually those plants probably will come back. So it's a temporary decline in some of these species. Am I going at an okay pace, do you think?
Yeah, that's
Steve,
fine.
or-
We can have questions afterwards, Steve. Why don't you go through it and then let the
Okay.
board decide what they want to clarify.
Okay, sure. So, for example, in Comfort Lake, that's question number 4. What's the assessment for the continued expansion of EWM? That's a great question. Nitrogen levels, things like that. Well, right now, we are close to being kind of not built out, but well distributed around the lake. We are finding milfoil growing out to about 10 feet of water depth and pretty much surrounding in a band around much of the lake. So what we've done is we put together a map of all the milfoil sightings that we've surveyed from 2015 to 2021. And we end up with about 30 acres of the worst case where we have milfoil found at moderate to heavy levels over the last 6 years. So that is, that's a fair amount. The shoreline is pretty well infested with Eurasian water milfoil out to about 10 feet of water depth. Now, next question might be, okay, so what happens now? Well, because it's been in the lake for 7 years, milfoil, it is, and it fragments on its own, it's everything else. Almost all the sediment, almost all the lake shoreline has been exposed to Eurasian milfoil. We're at probably its maximum extent right now. There might be a few little areas where it might increase or decrease, but 30 acres of Eurasian milfoil seems to be probably about the max that we would probably consider or look at over the years. And that was based on delineating these milfoil occurrences for the last 6 or 7 years. One thing that is a little bit interesting is that the nitrogen levels in the lake sediments are relatively low. Although milfoil has been in the lake for 7 years, theoretically, the nitrogen shouldn't really support heavy growth indefinitely. We would expect a little bit of a decline in the abundance of milfoil as time goes on. Maybe not necessarily the distribution is what we would kind of predict. Point number 5, or question number 5, is Floridone used? If Floridone is used in Comfort Lake and there's some loss of water clarity in native species, what's the recovery? The recovery looks good. Again, the loss of some of these native species should be temporary, and that is they're perennial species. The seed bank is there. Coontail would probably come back if it was in somewhat of a decline, and even some of the native pond weeds. The cabbage is very, very robust. It should come back. Lilies typically are not impacted by Floridone, so they should come through okay. In terms of clarity, if there was a decrease in clarity, we would expect that to rebound as well. However, we're talking about clarity and plant dominance and things. There's always an ongoing battle between the algae and the aquatic plants. If the algae gets on top and becomes dominant, clarity might not recover all the way after a after 1 or 2 Floridone treatments. And then the last question here is, what is a control strategy that we might recommend for Comfort Lake? And again, this is very broad. There's so many different types of options. We can do it a number of different ways, but what we have found with other watershed districts through trial and error is that in the riparian zone, which is at 0 to 150 feet out from shore, sometimes that is best left up to the lake resident to manage. And then when you go from 150 feet deeper, which is considered open water, nobody really has rights to that, but a lake association or a watershed district can manage that. And with one permit, you can treat everything over or past 150 feet. So the riparian area, what goes on, what can we do there? What I have found over the years is that it's very subjective in terms of how we work with that near shore area. Some lake residents would prefer to have all milfoil removed. Other residents might prefer to have, they can tolerate some growth, but not the nuisance growth. And then some residents would like to just leave it alone. So there's quite a range of considerations, and it would be, that's why sometimes it's best left up to the individuals to decide what might be best for their near shore area and what they would prefer. So those are some bullet points. Should we open up for some questions if there are any?
Yes, that'd be fine. I'll just open it up to the board and you can ask Steve some questions, maybe get through this, and then we can go back to the letter and see if there's anything in Mike's email that we want to open it up to discuss. Questions or comments?
I have a couple.
Go ahead, Manager Anderson.
When Steve, when you talk about the nitrogen being low in a lake,
Yes.
and that the milfoil will only last as long as the nitrogen levels are there. Well, don't they replenish themselves year to year? So are you just running on a hamster wheel, or does the nitrogen all of a sudden go away because it's one of the foundational nutrients necessary for lakes and animals and plants and all kinds of things in the ecosystem? So I'd like you to address that.
That's a great question. Nitrogen in the sediments is fairly stable. And by low nitrogen, we probably are not going to increase nitrogen. However, when milfoil first comes into a lake, it's going to use some of the available nitrogen that hasn't been used in the past. Milfoil is a high nitrogen specialist, it's called, as a plant. And so this available nitrogen is taken up, and milfoil for the first few years really explodes in growth. But then after that easy nitrogen is consumed and actually goes to nitrate and into the water column and eventually actually degasses, the sediment nitrogen that we have tested is pretty much stable. And what we found is that the nitrogen is fairly low.
Mhm.
That will support milfoil growth, but theoretically does not support the heavy, abundant growth where milfoil comes up to the surface and branches and things like that. Past experience indicates that you need high nitrogen for milfoil to branch profusely, in that top foot of water, and that's where the mat goes, and that is really the recreational problem and nuisance.
Yeah, but in Comfort Lake's example, we have a tremendous amount of total suspended solids coming in, which are ortho solids from what we've been told in the past. 28,137 pounds come through the inlet from the Sunrise River every single year. So aren't you just replenishing those nutrients? So we may not be true to what you just said because we have different inputs. And the ecosystem is different. You have to look at every single lake's ecosystem before you can make any determinations. Otherwise, you're just using averages.
Well, those are great points. Very scientific, Manager. I'm not sure what the nitrogen concentration is coming in, but it very well could. The suspended nitrogen coming in can also be used by milfoil, Eurasian milfoil. If that's at a high concentration, that could sustain some pretty heavy growth.
Mhm.
I'm wondering, have we been at the Sunrise? What are the nitrogen concentrations coming in? When we do the sediment nitrogen, that is pretty much exchangeable ammonium because that has been found to be the most bioavailable. But there can still be nitrogen coming in from the watershed that could contribute to some milfoil growth as well. Is the Sunrise River considered to be high, low, moderate in nitrogen inputs?
I can't answer that without looking at the monitoring report. I'm not even sure if we monitor for that.
Yeah,
I'd have to.
well, that's a
look
good,
at
but that's a good
It's a
point.
It's a possibility, so we should
Yeah.
look it up, right?
That's right. Yep.
Okay, and then just a couple more. The DNR's concern is the aggressive growth in the lily pad area. Comfort's been known for its lily pad coverage, and it has diminished over the last 4 or 5 years. So they're concerned about that. The milfoil seems to be coming in with the lilies, so it's entangling, the stems and the root structures and so on. So how do you address that?
Well, lilies have a natural variability or have an annual variability of increasing and decreasing. We would have to, fortunately, we have some point intercept surveys. We'll have to take a look at those and take a look at the lily. There's two types of lilies. The yellow flowers are spatterdock and the white flowers are white lilies. We should have pretty good data on those lily pads and their distribution and also their abundance. If they are decreasing, and it's a significant decreasing trend, then we should take a look at what is the cause of that. Generally, submerged plants don't really control those lilies. Just from the standpoint that rhizome of the horizontal rhizome of a lily has so much stored energy that it pushes those stems right up to the surface. So even if there is milfoil there, those stems get up to the surface and then you get the leaf. And once that leaf hits the water surface, it actually outcompetes submerged plants because it gets full sun. So I wouldn't expect the milfoil to have a detrimental impact on the lilies. There could be some other things that might be involved.
Okay, so you wouldn't expect, or that there's no damage to the lilies from the.
You're right. I would say I wouldn't expect, but I haven't looked at the lily distribution. I think we have that information.
Okay. Another question is about the biomass that's created with Eurasian milfoil.
Yeah.
And what impact does that have on the oxygenation of especially when the thermocline is occurring, but in the summer months, we have this tremendous depletion of oxygen. And I've read some things that are attributing lakes that are infested with Eurasian milfoil. That is a very contributing factor. And what do you have to say about that? Because that impacts fishing, the health of the lake, the entire ecosystem of the lake. So would you address that, please?
Sure. In the shallow water, during the day, we're not going to have an oxygen depletion. During the day, when we're photosynthesizing, and milfoil and also the attached algae on the milfoil leaflets, it might be super saturated with oxygen. However, in the evening, all the carbohydrates that were produced with photosynthesis, now the plants are respiring and they're using oxygen. So in those shallow waters, we could very well get some oxygen depletion and due to the respiration of the plants and also of the algae. We have some areas with pretty heavy milfoil growth. We also have some areas, especially in the south end, very heavy coontail growth. So it's not uncommon for these oxygen pulses to come and go.
Mhm.
And fortunately, because the plants are relegated to about those 10-foot depths or less, we have a lot of lake area with a lot of oxygen that can replenish those areas almost immediately the next day. But that's a good point, Jackie. Some of the shallow water, it might have some impact on fish movement, especially in the evening. Fish coming, fish leaving the area,
Mhm.
not enough oxygen.
Yeah, my last question is on the riparian discussion.
Yeah.
And, every lake has a different riparian zone. And so you can't use this 150 feet to apply to every single lake. That's why it has to be much more specific, in my opinion. And from what I've read about riparian zones, it all depends on the glacier activity and how the lake was formed and all of that. Even comparing Wisconsin with Minnesota is dangerous because Wisconsin has more shallow lakes than we do. We have more deep lakes. So my point is that we can't get hung up on this average discussion because, again, like I said before, every lake is different and we need to look at the ecosystems of those lakes individually before we can make determinations on what we're supposed to do. And that's the whole point of how we set up the district and why we have these lake management districts and so forth. And they're all different. Their land use is different, their construction is different, their riparian zones are different. So if you look at the level map for the Comfort Lake or any of the lakes, you'll see that just in the depth information that's provided. We go out to 5 feet very quickly in most areas of Comfort Lake, and sometimes even 10 feet. And by the time you get out to 150 feet, you're in the middle of the lake. You know, we're a long, narrow lake. And so, and so you're basically saying we're not going to treat anything because this 150-foot number that we're using takes us out to the middle of the lake. Well, that's ridiculous. So I want you to maybe talk about that and how, in your experience, you've handled lakes that have riparian zones that are not, that are deep. They go into depth quickly. And so an individual has a hard time pulling weeds or doing anything like that. So it has to always be done by a contractor. So can you address that?
I think if I'm hearing you, for example, Forest Lake, almost all that curly leaf is well out into 150 feet out from shore because the riparian zone, there just isn't much curly leaf growing in the riparian zone of Forest Lake. So when we look at an open water treatment, it's almost always past 150 feet. And when we get up to an 8 to 10, 15 foot depth, that's almost always 150 feet or so out. In some lakes, shallow lakes, where the lake is never deeper than, I'm working on some lakes like that, 10-foot maximum depth, the whole lake is a littoral zone. And then there's some questions too, because theoretically it's a DNR rule that this 150 foot is the riparian. Jackie, I think what you're talking about too is the littoral zone versus the riparian zone.
Oh,
The
yes.
riparian zone
You're
is
right.
kind of a state statute definition, 150 feet. The littoral zone is the actual growing area of plants.
Yes.
And that can really vary from lake to lake. And in Comfort Lake, it's a fairly narrow littoral zone. And you're right, 150 feet includes almost the whole entire littoral zone. And once you get past 150 feet, you're in water deeper that plants aren't growing. Whereas in Forest Lake, 150 feet, you're still 8, 10 feet of water and plants grow there to 12 feet. So there's a lot of area for plant growth in the open water in deep lakes. In a lake like Comfort, the riparian zone, which is 150 feet, encompasses the whole entire littoral zone where all the plant growth, maybe in the whole lake, is situated. So that is Comfort Lake is somewhat of a unique situation from that standpoint. Bone Lake, a little bit of a similar situation as well, that 150 feet encompasses most of the littoral zone, which is just another word for plant growing zone. And so Bone Lake is in kind of the same setting as Comfort Lake, whereas Shields Lake, Moody Lake, they're a little bit more shallow, and their growth zone goes out a little bit further and exceeds a riparian zone. Am I addressing some of your
Yes, you are. And
questions?
thank you for the correction in the terminology, because that's exactly what I meant was the littoral zone. But that's where the activity happens. That's where the macrophytes are and the fish feed and all of that activity happens. And so if Eurasian milfoil, because of its intense matting, interacts with that ecosystem, which is what I've been reading, then why is that not considered a viable invasive species for a watershed district to be managing? And what
Well-
I'm hearing is that it's all the individual people's problem. It's not government's problem. Not even a special district like Comfort Lake, Forest Lake Watershed District that was designed to bring that service to the local people. So explain that to me, because I'm not
Okay.
getting it.
Well, that's a great question. So it's kind of the water quality question, is that milfoil being an invasive species has certain, we have special regulations for invasive species. From an ecological standpoint, Jackie, stem densities of Eurasian milfoil are not much higher or greater than stem densities of native plants. For example, there's a lot of literature that talks about if you have stem densities greater than 150 stems per meter squared, you start impacting fish habitat. Typically milfoil, and even the milfoil around Comfort Lake, is about 100 to about 130 stems per meter squared. So from a fish habitat standpoint, it's not affecting the fish, it's affecting more than anything else, recreational use and the aesthetics as well. But what does happen with milfoil, as it mats at the surface, it can grow high enough, in 3-4 feet of water, it starts growing along the top, and sometimes it's going to be sprouting at the top. That mat looks terrible, but ecologically, it's not a real serious problem. It's more of a navigational and recreational problem than it is an ecological problem. So from a water quality standpoint, milfoil rarely impacts water quality any differently than a dense growth of coontail and some of our other native species that have a fairly high density or abundance in some areas.
So you're saying that there's no ecological damage, that it's just recreation. That's all that we have to worry about with Eurasian
Well,
milfoil.
It's not 100% one or the other. There is, I'm sure you could consider some of this milfoil type of growth ecologically a problem, but it's not too much of a problem. I mean, it's still if we're looking strictly at the ecology, all those plant surfaces, man, they're offering surface area for macroinvertebrates and a whole variety of things like that. Fish densities, they have no trouble swimming through. Predator-prey interactions are still okay. They can feed in there. They can take refuge in there. Actually, a dense growth of coontail might be a little bit more detrimental because fish can't really penetrate sometimes that dense mat that we see like in the south end. So never say never. There can be some ecological tweaks and detriments with milfoil, but primarily it's recreational, navigational considerations.
Okay, my final question, I
Wait,
promise.
maybe we should give somebody else a chance. We've had about 9 questions. Let's take a break a minute, Manager Anderson, and open up to the other managers. Any other questions?
Yes, Chair Schmaltz, Manager Baki here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Could you provide some clarity for this discussion? It seems on May 26th, we had a motion to fund treatment of Eurasian water milfoil, and then we asked for more information regarding cost analysis. We're taking a deep dive now into treatment with fluoridone, and I'm just wondering where are we going with this conversation, and what is our outcome, please? Thank you.
I think what we're trying to get at here is there was a question of how much of a threat is Eurasian water milfoil to the lakes, and is it a water quality issue or a recreational issue? So we're discussing that right now to get all the facts out on the table. And then the fluoridine issue is an issue because it has some adverse water quality aspect potential to it. So we're trying to get the board up to speed on that particular issue. And for example, I just raised a quick checking question here to Manager Anderson's point about the prevalence of milfoil. The last 5 years, the average density of Eurasian water milfoil in Comfort Lake is 3%. So at 3%, I don't know, maybe Steve McCombs wants to comment on that, but I can't see how that could be a big impact on the lake in terms of from an ecological aspect, since it's way less than a lot of other plants. So that's an example of what we have to kind of flush out here, Dave, is what we're trying to get at. So I think we want to get back to that question, and we'll have to vote. One of the questions we're looking at is whether the watershed should take over UWM treatment or not, or whether we should offer it to the lake associations. For example, Steve McComas is saying in the riparian areas that should be up to the individual shoreline owner. And as Manager Anderson pointed out, that affects the whole lake pretty much. So it's a little bit unfair. So is there an opportunity with a lake association grant for the lake association in Comfort Lake, to take that responsibility and combine all the shoreline owners and treat that riparian area through a lake association grant? Now, Steve, maybe you can comment on that as a DNR would allow that, for example, but that would be a big advantage to the shoreline owners, I think, in defraying some of that cost that they have to incur. So I think you can see some value if that were your lake, that you would want to probably have some kind of a benefit like that. And maybe, Steve, that's an idea I just threw out, is trying to solve a problem here for Comfort Lake. Would that be allowed under the DNR, or how would that be handled? Do you have any thoughts on that?
The question being, can you do cost share on a riparian permit?
Yeah, so if the watershed, if it's up to the individual shoreline owners to treat that, and we'll treat the open water, if we offer a grant to the lakeshore owners, say up to say $15,000 a year, could they then coordinate all the shoreline owners and treat the shoreline, getting some grant money from the watershed, but with the Comfort Lake watershed organization, the Comfort Lake Lake Association putting in their fair share also, 25 or 35%.
Yes, you could. I think you might need to get some of that if we go beyond the rules and regulations, which is only 50% of the shoreline or 50 feet of shoreline per residence. If we want to go beyond that, we would need to get a variance from the DNR, which could be done through a lake vegetation management plan. They would have to sign off on it. And then you could do more of your shoreline than just the standard 50% or 50 feet, whichever is greater. And so that would be a consideration and could certainly be done. But we would still be a little bit limited. We wouldn't be as good a control as you can get with Floridone, which would take out the milfoil pretty much around the whole riparian area theoretically.
Right. So Dave, just to get back to your question here, this is what we're trying to get at. And I guess, the other thing is Floridone, because it has a potential impact on the native plants and perhaps could actually adversely affect water clarity in Comfort Lake that we're working so hard to do, there's a chance that the watershed district may vote not to even support that kind of a treatment. So that's another issue we have to discuss. So
no, thank you. Thank you, Chair. That does clarify our discussion. I thought we were just jumping in.
We're trying to get out of this tight box right now, but we'll be out of it shortly.
Thank you.
I know you've learned more than you ever want to know, but that's kind of what the role is here. I just got to remember it for 3 years from now.
President Schmalz,
Yes.
this is Manager Loth.
Yes, go ahead, Chris.
Can we get clarification on the motion that Manager Baki referred to from last meeting? I believe it was to provide a grant to the Comfort Lake Association for them to use it for Eurasian water milfoil treatment. Is that?
No, I believe the motion was to actually go and actually have some cost data developed, because one of the concerns we have here is the cost of treating Eurasian water milfoil, for example, if it went rogue into Forest Lake. Right now, we're only dealing with 30 or 40 acres out of 2,600. But if you had 1,200 acres that had to be treated, that's a pretty stiff bill for the Lake Association, for the watershed district to swallow. And so do we want to open ourselves up to that kind of liability, or do we want to have more partners participating in that cost? So that's kind of one of the trade-off arguments that we made at the last meeting.
Yes, I was asking for clarification on the motion that was passed last meeting with respect to, I believe it was Comfort Lake Association, a grant that we were going to provide as a stopgap between now and when the potential Lake Association grant program was flushed out a little bit more. Can I get some sort of clarification if that's incorrect, and I apologize if I'm not remembering things correctly.
Mr. Chair? This
Yes,
is,
go ahead.
this is Chuck. Just as a procedural matter, I'm looking at my notes from that meeting. And I do not see an actual motion that was seconded. What I have is that Manager Anderson did move that the district programmatically include Eurasian water milfoil treatment under its AIS program, and that motion did not receive a second, and then the staff was directed to come back with the information that it has come back with tonight.
Thank you,
That's
Chuck.
how- That's how I remember it as well.
Same as here. Chris,
Did
does
we-
that answer your question?
Did we authorize some sort of support to the Comfort Lake Association since the Lake Association grant wasn't formally adopted as a way to support the Comfort Lakes Association's effort to treat Eurasian water milfoil while we consider this Lake Association grant program? And then in addition to whether or not the watershed wants to get involved in directly treating and managing.
Chris, you're muted again.
I can answer that. In the memo I put together, actually for the next topic of discussion, in 2021, the Comfort Lake Association did actually get grant funding despite some items of that grant program not being fully fleshed out and approved. But in terms of this proposed full lake fluoridone treatment, they have not received anything yet.
Okay, are there any other questions? We'll be moving towards that direction tonight, though, Manager Loth. So any other questions for Steve?
I just have one. The
Okay.
DNR is doing this program with lake associations and find value in that. They did mention that they work with you quite a bit on this particular, they called it a research project because they are still researching the value of these fluoridone all lake treatments. So why would the DNR, with all that you've said tonight, be promoting this project? Or does it fall under the category of research to add to the scientific knowledge of how to treat lakes with milfoil growth? And then again, you really can't look at averages. I think Steve Schmalz, I think you used a 3% average over the last 5 or 6 years for Comfort. I think it's the progression, the increase in the volume of Eurasian milfoil that got the attention of the DNR and reached out to our lake president. So this didn't generate from Comfort Lake. This generated from the DNR contacting us. So I'd like to get some knowledge of that, since you work with the DNR all the time, Steve McComas, on these programs and do the delineation. So what do you know about that?
Well, you're right. DNR is right. This is somewhat of a research effort from the standpoint. It certainly is not a routine plant herbicide treatment. The DNR has some information on shallow lakes. They have some information on small lakes. They have some information on lakes that have been treated 2 or 3 times. They don't have a lot of information on lakes with kind of a low diversity, a relatively restricted littoral zone and things like that. So from that standpoint, they're interested in what the results would be. And it is kind of a trial. I don't know if we can call it research, but it's kind of a demonstration type project, because boy, they're asking for a lot of information too. They want point intercepts before and after, so they can really back out what the impacts have been and how effective it is and things like that. So from that standpoint, a little bit of research, a little bit of trial. And again, not necessarily, it's not a routine, they're not really funding just routine projects on a a large basis.
Right, right, okay.
Good, thank you. I have a couple questions too before we move on here. One is, Steve, you had mentioned that the residence time is supposed to be quite long. And so I'm wondering, with Comfort Lake having a more of a direct flow through lake as opposed to Forest Lake that has a very, very high residence time, it's like 6 years.
Mhm.
Has anybody looked at, has the DNR looked at this, and are we going to be treating a lake with fluoride where we're setting ourselves up to fail?
That's a good question, Steve. And that they have certainly recognized that in the past. And here's what happens. We put in enough herbicide to get us a concentration, very low concentration, 2, 3, 4 parts per billion. They come back in 30 days and they test around the lake to see what the concentration is. And if it has fallen much below 1 or 2, if it's dropped a couple parts per billion, they will add more herbicide to bump it back up. So it's called an application with a bump. And sometimes there's 2 bumps. They'll come back in another 30 days. And if the concentration has diminished, they will add more herbicide to bring it back up to maintain that target concentration of 2, 3, or 4 parts per billion. So they will be tracking that and keep that concentration somewhat even for a good 60, 70, 80 days.
So the question then is, who pays for the extra herbicide?
That should be built into the application. I'm not
So that's
sure.
already included in the 60,000 then.
I'm
That's the
pretty
upper-
sure it is.
Yeah, that's the
Okay.
upper number. It's 50 to 60, depending upon those
Okay.
extra treatments.
All right, just wanted to raise that question. The second question I have is another checking question on the discussion I went earlier. Manager Anderson talked about the importance of the possibility of Eurasian water milfoil depleting the oxygen content, affecting fish, so forth, in shallow areas. That's a good question, but last time we talked about also the possibility of Eurasian water milfoil contributing to the algae zone during when algae is required, and I thought we should clarify between the difference between those two concepts, the oxygen depletion versus the algae concentration contribution. I believe that EWM normally dies towards the end of the season when the algae season is already completed. So could you comment on that point and maybe better clarify it than I could from the board, Steve?
Sure, Steve, that's a good point. The nutrients associated with milfoil, when it dies back in September, October, even into November, it does release nutrients. However, the temperature at that time is not conducive to algae blooms in any magnitude, and especially not blue-green blooms. So those nutrients go into the microbial component, which are, fancy word, heterotrophs. They're not algae at all. And then those microbes are in turn being preyed upon by macroinvertebrates and zooplankton and other things. So the nutrients from the dieback of Eurasian milfoil are going into microbes, which in turn go up the food chain, so to speak. And that's why not only when milfoil dies back, but all the native plants and Forest Lake and everything else, when they die back, they don't necessarily generate algae blooms. Rather, those nutrients are going into the microbial component, and then in a little bit different food chain and a food web that goes from there. Whereas curly leaf pondweed, when it dies back in June and July, that phosphorus does have the potential to go into algae growth, which, because at that time of the year, the temperatures and everything else, and if algae are phosphorus limited, they'll take that stuff up.
Okay, thank you, Steve. So are there any other questions?
I've got one question.
Yeah, Doug?
What is the impact, using the example of Comfort Lake, if you treated Comfort Lake, what's the impact on the river where these outflows take that chemical down the river?
Oh, that's a good question. Fortunately, the concentration is so low at 2 to 3 parts per billion, maybe 4 parts per billion. I'm not sure what the target is, but it's in that range. You don't get the contact time in the river for this to have any impact on the native plants. In fact, the native plants have a tolerance. They don't start getting impacted for the most part till you get to 10 or 12 or 15 parts per billion. The label lets you treat up to about 20 or 30 parts per billion. If you did that, you'd knock out every plant in the whole lake. But at these low concentrations, and then a relatively low contact time in the river outflow, we would have very, very low unintended impacts to native plants or to the other biota in the stream and river.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Any other questions?
I just have one more quick one.
Yes, Manager Lewis, go ahead.
Steve, what changed 10 or 12 years ago when the DNR started to allow this treatment?
Kind of a change in philosophy almost, because they just were not allowing not only Floridone, but they were much more restrictive on herbicide use as well. They were really promoting harvesting over herbicides. But then what happened is that we found harvesting just wasn't that effective. And second of all, as more information was being gathered, we were finding that the herbicides didn't seem to have these unintended consequences that we thought might occur. And on top of that, the Corps of Engineers stepped up and did these massive research programs using a whole variety of lakes and mesocosms and hundreds of hours and many, many papers. And that showed that the impacts of herbicide use, extended use, was probably minimal. It was there, but an acceptable risk. And that probably helped sway the Minnesota DNR to kind of change their strategy and their emphasis a little bit about 10, 12 years ago.
Thank you.
Including the use of Floridone. They found at low concentrations, it wasn't nearly as bad as some of these first efforts. Well, we're using too high of Floridone, knocked out a lot of things.
Okay, so just summarizing, one thing that we want to follow up on, I believe, is the idea of going and checking what the nitrogen content of the solids coming into Clear Lake, Comfort Lake. I keep saying Clear Lake, Comfort Lake.
We actually have
Because Clear Lake was treated with Floridone. But anyway, Comfort Lake, we should have that as a follow-up question for staff. And then
I have or some information on that, Steve, or President Schmaltz, sorry. And you're muted. McComas, were you looking for the TKN, the total Kleindall nitrogen level?
Looking for the other nitrogen as well, nitrate, ammonia, and TKN.
Okay. Let's see. Okay.
Yeah, Cecilia was going to answer that earlier, I think. So.
Okay.
Yes, I mean, if I can just President Schmaltz.
Thank you.
There has been a significant amount of monitoring going on both at the Sunrise River and the Little Comfort Lake in terms of nitrogen. And we do have a very good data regarding the different kinds of nitrogen. We have the nitrate part of it. We have the Kendall nitrogen measured. Kendall nitrogen is a dominant form of nitrogen in both lakes, and Little Comfort and Comfort Lake. So we do have a significant amount of information for, I think it's probably about 15, 16 years of monitoring. One thing that is important to mention is that the nitrogen coming from the Sunrise River, based on the analysis, most of it is Kendall nitrogen, but it gets bypassed pretty quickly. I mean, the inlet and outlet of the lake, they're pretty close together. The more interesting part to analyze would be what is the Kendall nitrogen and overall total nitrogen coming from Little Comfort into the lake, and also what is the direct drainage area component of it. And all those things are the specific morphology of the lake is that maybe what is coming from Sunrise River is not as important for the overall nitrogen health of the lake as it is the direct drainage and what is coming from Little Comfort. We do have that information. We have significant amount of data on that.
Okay. Can I ask a follow-up, President Schmaltz? I guess he's not there. So I'm going to ask you, Cecilio, did you say that we have data coming from Little Comfort into Big Comfort, or we don't?
My recollection is that we do at the entrance, at the inlet of Little Comfort. And definitely we have a significant number of years at the inlet into Comfort Lake from the Sunrise River.
Right, but we don't have the activity directly from Little Comfort to Big Comfort. It's coming in at the inlet point on the, would be the south end of Little Comfort, right?
Correct, yeah.
Okay, all right.
But I mean, I was gonna say that if, I mean, the total kindle nitrogen is more of the organic component of it. The inorganic component is more attached to sediment. So that would be, kindle nitrogen would be the one that would be more relevant in that particular case. What is coming from Little Comfort could be transmitted to Comfort more quickly.
Okay. So I guess, you know, just to kind of wrap this up for myself here. So we have these consistent inputs of nitrogen all the time. And so we're not ever going to get to the point, Steve McComas, that you talked about, where it's all used up and the milfoil is going to die down because it's being fed every year through these input sources on a fairly consistent high level, is what I'm hearing.
You know, that's a great question. I think we have the data to back that out. I'd be interested in to kind of get a handle on just the loading, for example, nitrogen loading, and to put that in a context. You're right, manager, Jackie, it is coming in consistently, but is it coming in hot and high, or is it coming in maybe lower at a lower input overall load, and maybe not necessarily the nitrogen form that would be used by milfoil. So those are some questions. Sounds like Cecilio has the data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, I was muted before, sorry about that. Steve, have you done any survey work on Eurasian water milfoil and Comfort Lake yet this year?
No, we're going to go out tomorrow.
Okay, or just a day early. Okay.
That's right.
All right, so we've actually covered now the pros and cons of fluoride, and also we've got a pretty better understanding of EWM as an AIS and how it might affect water quality. So I think now we're ready to, if everybody agrees, to jump ahead to the discussion on the proposed Lake Association grant and see if we can work out something that we can get past here to get a trial going or something like that. So is everybody okay with moving on? Okay, hearing no objection, we'll move on. And Steve, I think we're pretty much finished with you if you need to move on. So
Okay.
I appreciate the input. Again, as usual, you did a great job for us, and we appreciate that.
You know, I might just have you on in the background. I'm going to be doing some things anyway, so I'm
Okay.
taking off. I'll go mute and I'll take off the video. But if something comes up, give me a holler.
Great, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Sure. You're
Yeah,
welcome.
Manager,
Thank you.
Manager Schmaltz, Steve McComas, say one thing that I would like to kind of look at from a quasi research standpoint for the district, because certainly the loading is one thing. We do have the data for all of our major lakes and our inlets and outlets, so we could look at that. But the other kind of unique thing about Bone Lake is that, you know, by observation, and you and I have discussed the you know, the different usage of nitrogen in you know, plants and how it can be utilized. It's different than phosphorus and potash. You know, those are the three big, NP and K are the three big nutrients for plant development and, you know, crop production. But we have a really unique situation in Bone Lake where we've removed this source out of the northeast corner of the lake that was this historical nitrogen, you know, this barnyard component. And that also, you know, whether it's just been coincidental or if these have ongoing sources, but the nitrogen locations on Bone Lake have been tied to these inputs from locations of known, you know, older farmsteads. So that one on the southwest corner in particular, and then the northeast corner. So by removing that one in the northeast corner, I'd like to see us kind of making a more concentrated effort to look at the data to see then, help understand from a lake ecology standpoint, how much that nitrogen is, coming in from external sources drives the EWM.
Well, that's a great idea. Wow. A natural experiment right there.
So we have the data. Mike, are you suggesting we actually go ahead and have those two comparisons made and maybe look at some other lakes too to see what kind of compare the flow rates of nitrogen into the lake so we have a better understanding of that phenomenon?
Well, I think we could just look at what we have internally just within the district. We have a lot of data by most standards, so we can work with EOR and Steve McComas and staff and look to present something later in the season, especially, with a particular eye on Bone Lake to see what happens there after that project that we've completed in the northeast corner.
Sounds good. We'll look forward to that then.
Mr. President, can I just make a very quick
Yes,
point
go
on
ahead,
this?
Helio.
Yes, as I said, we do have the data. It is kind of interesting to notice that when we analyze the data as part of the diagnostic study, and especially for Comfort Lake, we're looking, a lake starts, and Steve obviously knows more than I do on this, but a lake starts getting controlled by nitrogen when you have the ratio between total nitrogen and total phosphorus below 10. The interesting thing about the data that we got for Little Comfort and Comfort is that the rate is about 17-1 and 28-1 in case of the Comfort Lake and 44-1. So we are fairly far away from going below 10 to have the lake really being concerned about being nitrogen the control factor. That's data that was put together a while ago. So there's new data coming in, and that would be also important to consider.
So summarizing, Celia, you're saying that probably that with those type of data points being 3 or 4 times higher than the critical level, it's probably not a high impact area for us for feeding additional EWM.
Oh, no, I'm not necessarily saying that. What I'm saying is that we're not talking a ratio of total nitrogen to total phosphorus of 5 or 8 or 10. Which would be dominated by nitrogen. We're talking a ratio that would be more like 28-1 or 44-1 or 17-1, which tell us that, in general terms, obviously depend on the conditions that Steve was talking about for a particular summer or a particular period of time. But in general terms, this is a lake that algae growth is controlled by phosphorus, not nitrogen. But it's this is my input. Probably there will be no nuances on that statement.
Okay, remember, we can follow up when the report comes back in whenever it gets finished here. So,
yeah.
All right, let's move on then. Mike, do you want to move on to the community grant program and maybe go through the history, and then we can get into a discussion and see if we can work out some kind of a program?
Okay. Bobby's gonna bring it up there. Thank you.
I'm going to step away a second. I'll be right back.
Okay.
I can give the overview too if you need me to, Mike.
Oh, I just was waiting for him to return, but. Right.
Go ahead without me. I'll be back. Let's go ahead. I'll catch up.
Okay. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I've got a cough here I'm trying to deal with. Maybe, Karen, if you don't mind, I'll let you proceed with this, but it's really just trying to put together a history of where the program was within our watershed management plan, and that's really what we were trying to convey here in the memo is what the background of the program was and how this community grant program could lend itself to be the framework for the Lake Association grant program. Go ahead, Garrett. Thank you.
Yeah, managers, it was requested of staff, last meeting to, provide a little more information on not only the list of projects that were sometimes in part, constructed through the use of this grant program, but also, as Mike mentioned, just kind of the history and also how the community grant program is described in our 10-year watershed management plan. I won't go too in depth into the history of the program. I think staff detailed all the steps in pretty good detail. Suffice it to say that, it's been, well over a year now of iterations coming to the board, reviews and more information provided, which is culminated. And I think, going forward with tonight's discussion, there's some considerations that the board could maybe use in their discussion. I think when staff look at, items like this, it's always through the lens of the 10-year watershed management plan. And I think there's a couple options to move forward for the board to consider. And one is just that, the district already has a community or commercial and community grant program that was approved in the 10-year watershed management plan. On several occasions in the past year, around these discussions, managers have mentioned that the community grant program is underutilized. So the funding has typically always been there, and it's always been available to the lake associations already as they're eligible organizations in that description. And if you look at the watershed management plan's description for the community and commercial grant program versus some of the iterations of the lake association grant program, there's a lot of redundancy between the two, and in fact, in some aspects almost identical. One of the main differences, which obviously will be discussed tonight, is the inclusion of AIS treatments in those eligible expenses. But one of the issues that kind of arises with creating a new program potentially for discussion is that, by having just a lake association grant, it's kind of an exclusionary program in that, compared to the community grant program, which is open to a much wider array of taxpayers. So obviously, lake association grant, that's only going to be available to 3 organizations in the district. And when you take a look at all the households that live along those 3 shorelines, that accounts for about 18% of the households in the district. And having conducted lake monitoring on many of the district's smaller water bodies and interacting with those residents, I can confidently say that many of them share the same sentiments and concerns as residents on much larger lakes with those lake associations. And I think they would also be, interested in those funds as well, and not having a lake association which excludes them potentially from this program. I think they would be disappointed in that. So something to consider. And it's just kind of that public perception of, this program, which as described currently, would exclude the majority of taxpayers in the district. So all that said, I don't want it to sound at all like the district or staff is opposed to supporting the local lake associations in any way. And in fact, I typically did the liaison to these organizations, and I fully understand the value of supporting them and strengthening our partnerships. For instance, the district has always been available to them for guidance and assistance, and they have been such a huge help to us, especially in outreach, feedback on projects and grant proposals, and in my program, most importantly, keeping a watchful eye on the lake. Water hyacinth in Bone Lake was discovered by a lake association member, and we were able to go out there with the next day even and start managing that. So we definitely want to support them, but it just goes back to, again, that the funding is already there through the community grant program. And if the board does want to consider including AIS funding to those lake associations, amendment could be made to the 10-year watershed management plan. So that said, admittedly, even the community grant program is incomplete in its current form. It needs a lot of the same things that the proposed lake association grant program needs, in that it needs to have an approved application form. It needs to have a review form, all these things. And again, as listed in the memo, staff have created some of these additional materials that were presented at the August 12th, 2021 meeting that could be slightly modified and retrofitted into that community grant program and used. So I just wanted to throw that there as a consideration. The other one is obviously to move forward with the separate grant program, which is completely fine. There are just some considerations in the memo that we would like the board to obviously consider in terms of, having that transparent application form, making it more exclusive, and then at all costs, or and just that public perception of any conflict of interest, as discussed in the past meetings. Not to say that there is any, it's just the perception alone we want to try to avoid. So with that, open it to discussion. Thanks.
Thanks, Garrett. Are there any comments or questions to take this discussion forward?
Well, yeah, I have one question, and that's about the amendment would be necessary. This was vetted last year before the management plan was adopted. And the understanding that I came away with in the memo from Chuck was that if it's part of you're making changes to an existing program, that you don't need to go through that amendment process. That can be done by the board. And so I don't know if you prepared Chuck for this discussion tonight, but I would be interested to hear what he has to say about it, or maybe he can bring that back to us.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, go ahead, Chuck.
Manager Anderson. There's, I think, two parts to the question. One has to do with the district reorienting its overall cost share grant program to create a new named component of that program. And that is something that I believe that the district can do without a formal amendment. There is an expedited process in the Bowser rules where it's just a matter of basically providing notification to your cities and counties and others who hold the plan. The one piece of it that causes me possibly to adjust my thinking a bit about the opinion I offered some time ago is the question of if this cost share program is expanding to address AIS issues that are not related to ecological protection or enhancement, water quality issues, if it's correct, and I'm just speaking as to what I've heard knowledgeable people say, including all of you. For example, if it's to fund lake association vegetation management for non-ecological purposes, for recreational purposes, does your plan talk about that being part of your program activities, managing AIS for non-ecological purposes? I've in this memo and listening to Garrett, perhaps I'm hearing that it's not clear that it does. If that's the case, then you're adjusting certain of your programmatic goals for AIS, and arguably there might be some benefit in having the plan amendment process where there is the opportunity for a public discussion that you are expanding your program goals and the way that you're going to apply district resources. So it's not clear cut. It's not clear that you necessarily would need to do that, but it also may be a beneficial thing. And it's not an extensive process. It's about 60 days, though I understand that you're you also have an interest in being able to start funding in a timely way this season.
Well, yes, but whether the district's going to participate in it, that's really the question. There's other ways to raise money, but is the district going to participate? That's the real question. One thing I want to say about this recreational value is that was always part of the last 10-year plan. And unless we've changed that introductory language, I've had this discussion, with the board numerous times, so over the years. So I'm not quite getting why recreation value is not part of that discussion when it's been part of that decision-making. And the overall scope of what the point is of the district. So I think we need to go back and look at that introductory language from our last plan and see if that was carried over. I'd have to go back and take a look at it. But the intent wasn't to change the focus that we have. It was to expand and adapt to the situation that's before us now. We've gone through the first 10 years of getting the district in order and putting things into place that will help water quality. Everything we do helps water quality. And the last point I want to make is that all this money that we're getting from the Clean Water Fund, recreation value, fishing value, stream health value for the population of fish species is what the Clean Water Council report is all about. And that is the focus of the clean water money, is to make the lakes fully recreational, fully fishable, and fully enjoyable by the people of Minnesota. That's what they're paying into this extra tax for. And that's accomplished through all of these programs like we have in place here. So it's not an exclusionary thing. And I'm always, when I hear this discussion, it's always this either or. It's not an either or. So I guess that's a fundamental difference in the way that that I've always operated here and understood our mission to be. Now we can have different focuses at different times. And I was glad to see this in the memo for a change, because it really addresses this fundamental change in how we look at the nutrient loads. We were focused very heavily on phosphorus because it's the limiting factor. But we have now cleaned our lakes up beyond the state standard and well into our sustainability goals that we went above, because the direction at the very beginning of the district was to get back to pre-development conditions as best as we could. Not 100% is not always going to be attainable, but that was the goal, is to take out all of this impact that's happened through the development and growth and the land use changes that have occurred in the district. And that includes our permitting program and our regulations and the oversight and the focus on getting rid of that algae producer, because it's the quickest way to get the public to see that the lakes are cleaning up. And so it's time to move on. And that was the discussion we had during the planning period for this current 10-year plan, is that we need to move beyond that. And we need to look at the individual characteristics of our lake management districts so that we can have focus plans that address these things that are different between all of the districts. So I just want to bring that point out.
Just a comment, follow up on that. I would like to make a point to Mr. Holtman about the fact that, a precedent had been set earlier because we were involved with the Eurasian water milfoil treatment. And we decided to take a hiatus on that because of some risk considerations, in fact, to see what would turn up over the next 2 years. So the fact that we've already been involved with it, I think that would set a precedent that we can easily go back without an amendment. Would you like to comment on that legal point?
Well, yeah, what you do and what you apply your public funds to is defined by what's in your watershed management plan. With respect to your programs that you choose, they're based on the broad discussion in your plan about your goals and priorities and identification of the needs and interests in the watershed. So it isn't necessarily deeply challenging to be able to define programs that that are directed at multiple goals that include fishability and swimmability. You need, you need that discussion in your watershed management plan, but I can't speak to the details, but if your Eurasian water milfoil treatment is something that you have been doing within the cycle of this present plan, that would certainly suggest that it is part of your goals and that there's a basis for it in the plan. And we can take a look at that and affirm that.
And more generally speaking, we don't have to be EWM specific. We can just, the plan is not specific by species, it's specific by the generic description of AIS, which automatically includes EWM. And by precedent, we get involved with that in the previous 10-year plan.
Well, yes, I would agree. You don't need that specificity.
Right. Okay. So I just wanted to pursue that as an option, maybe to move along a little quicker if we had to. But okay. Any comments from the board on where we are and what Garrett has said? I think what I hear Garrett saying is that, staff feels that they put a lot of time on this. Maybe it's down to us now to get down and make some decisions on what we want to try. I think that, let me open it up to some other comments before I have anything else to say. Any other comments from the board, please?
Chair Schmaltz,
Yes,
Manager
go ahead.
Baki.
Go ahead, Manager Baki.
I had heard that the Lake Association residents make up 18% of the total residents in the district. And as a past president of a lake association, the watchdog of our lakes often falls on those residents who live on the lake and those volunteers who are part of the association, who often pay out of their own pockets to help with the water quality. Yet the lakes are available to all residents within the watershed district. So I see that providing grants to lake associations to help them in that task is a worthy thing. It's not being minimized to just a select group of residents within the watershed district, because everybody benefits from that. It is the hard work of the volunteers and of course the watershed district as a partner in protecting and improving the quality of the lakes. And like Manager Anderson said, we have met our goals and we have exceeded them. And it is because of the hard work of these volunteers and the watershed district. Thank you.
Good point, Manager Baki. Thank you for your perspective. Any other thoughts, perspectives?
The only thing, Steve, that I would like to see, the direction last meeting at the end of the discussion was to have managers provide input. I gave some specific things that I wanted them to think about, and I haven't seen anything in writing, so I just would like to know if there's anything that the managers thought should be added or tweaked or changed in any way.
Any comments? I have one. I reached out to Jerry Gruntner, the president of Forest Lake Association. He had looked at this a number of times, and he wrote back a rather insightful letter. And by and large, he was very happy to see that the grant process was simplified, and he felt it's now much more usable than it was before for lake associations. He felt that there would be strong interest in using it for EWM. He wasn't so sure that he couldn't quite see yet how the educational value available on the grant could be used by lake associations, because he felt they didn't have the skill sets in their staff to do that, but he was willing to hire somebody if the lake association would pay for somebody like that, for example. And he also thought that the shore restoration program is a very strong program and one that they would like to see move forward with. So he had, by and large, a lot of positive things to say about the changes that have been made since we did this last summer. So I think that's encouraging. I also, Randy Schumacher from the CAC reached out to me last night and just expressed the concern that we've all had to a certain extent, in terms of how we handled some of the earlier grant with Comfort Lake without formal approval, that was that was an indicator perhaps that we need to be as a watershed district and a public organization, we have to be careful that we don't set ourselves up and setting precedents that aren't the best ones to set. So he was a little concerned about that, but I think we're all aware of that situation now and have got a lot of good suggestions in terms to correct that situation. And I think Garrett has mentioned a lot of those in this letter. So that's the input I have. I also have some suggestions of how we can proceed, but I'm going to open it up to the other managers if they have any thoughts.
President Schmalz, I have one question.
Yes, go ahead, Manager Loss.
From a decision-making process, do we collectively think that we need to make a decision on what our either inclusion or exclusion of EWM is within the water management plan before looking at what a watershed provided grant is allowed to be used for? In other words, is there a difference between the watershed directly managing EWM versus giving a dedicated funds to a lake association to complete that task?
Well, I think first of all, just based upon what legal counsel Holtman mentioned, is that, you know, AIS is generic terms. We've been involved with that for a number of years, including this 10-year plan. So that I think that EWM is on the drawing board to be involved in however we want to involve it. Now, the question is, it's a different question if we want to have the watershed take it on at 100% itself, or as we talked about at the last meeting, trying to build a partnership around that because of the risk involved of future costs escalating so highly. Plus the fact that it's better to have partners and getting more people involved in addressing this, which could be a large potential issue if it got out of control in any one lake. So I don't think we have to make that decision tonight. I think, well, I've got some suggestions, but I'm going to, again, hold up. And so I think I answered your question, at least I hope I did. If not, maybe rephrase it and I'll try again.
If the current water management plan exists without the language that Manager Anderson is wondering if it's there, strictly following the water management plan, with the understanding that EWM doesn't contribute to phosphorus, there's not a water quality concern, are we okay allowing watershed funded grants to be used for that purpose if we as a watershed aren't willing to take that on ourselves?
I think first of all, that again, the AI, we talked about in the management plan, the 10-year plan, we talked generically about AIS and not itemized specific issues that we have to deal with. So under that umbrella, it's included. Now, the recreational idea, I think that one, in fact, I knew it was part of the last 10-year plan because when I was on the CAC, many more years than I want to recall ago, that was one of the things that I pushed for with our first administrators to get the plan to include in the mission this concept of a recreational value. It's a basis for the tax basis for the lakes and so forth. So there's a lot of good reasons for that. So I think in either case, I think we're still covered right now.
President Schmaltz, if I could jump
Yes.
in. The watershed or the 10-year watershed management plan does include or does mention managing AIS for recreational benefits. It's actually goal 4 of the AIS program 311 program goals. And it states that that we would indirectly manage AIS for recreational benefits by providing technical support to other organizations, and that being the lake associations. So that's how it is stated in the 10-year watershed management plan. Not that we would be doing the management for recreational benefit, but we would be providing the technical advice and assistance and support.
Thank you, Garrett. I think that even opens up the door further for us. So
Yeah, I agree.
agree, Manager Anderson. Yeah, I think I agree too. Chris, are you okay with that?
Yes.
Okay, good. Any other comments?
If you could just
Okay,
send me, if you could just send me those comments that you got in writing, Steve, that would be great. From
Yes.
Randy and Jerry, that would be great. Thank you.
Right, we'll do that. Okay, just trying to move ahead here. I'm just going to summarize some thoughts. I'm going to kind of talk as a manager rather than as a president, but just in terms of looking at the data we're trying to pull together here. We've got a lake association proposed grant format put together, and that includes both water quality and AIS and so forth, and includes educational value. We've also got a community grant program, which is more oriented towards water quality improvement. And the third thing that we've got kind of hanging around right now is this growing interest in lakeshore restoration programs. So those are the three issues I think that we've got kind of bouncing around in this discussion. And so my thought would be that maybe we would be better off just moving ahead with the Lake Association program, since it's been worked through now quite a bit, and we've got additional changes to make it more open to the public. And then update the community program so we have a more viable way to go forward with that, with you're learning what we've learned from the Lake Association format. And then as we continue to do, then begin to work more aggressively on a lakeshore restoration program. And as that comes together, decide whether that should be under the community program or under the lakeshore program, Lake Association program, or perhaps a separate individual program for the community like we used to have. That would include everybody in all lakes to be able to participate. So those are the three thoughts that I see bouncing around in this document. And I guess I'd open it up to board members to either, change that or add to it or support it, or just trying to move this thing along. Any thoughts or suggestions for those observations?
Well, I think this is Manager Anderson. For me, the DNR Score Your Shore program, I brought that up, I think through the CAC first and then to the board some years ago when it was first developed. And I think Garrett mentioned this, but we need to formalize the district's approach to that kind of thing so that we can incorporate that in with what the lake associations want to do. But that was part of the technical expertise that I mentioned at the last meeting, is that that's where the staff can really help. Someone comes in with an idea from the lake associations and brings in this application process, and then it's the staff's responsibility to make it a success. And how do they do that? They use their technical expertise. They use their knowledge of programs that are available through the 7 water agencies of the state. There's a lot of material available. Now, a layperson is not going to know what all of that is, but people in the industry know it. And a lot of the time that can be provided at no cost. And the lake associations can, slap their name on it with a label or some identifier to show the participation, as well as the district. So we don't want anything going out without the district's name on it. And that kind of help and coordination, goes a long way with a motivated group of people that want to do good things for their water body. So I think that can be put into a very quick, 2-3 page kind of a document. It doesn't have to be overwhelming. The whole point is to tap into that creativity of the public underneath our overall goal of restoring natural shorelines and making sure that we give the tools that the lake associations need to reach their members. So I don't see that as being overwhelming. I think there needs to be a little coordination on that part by the staff, but they don't have to carry the weight of all of that. That material can also be used with the smaller lakes that do not have lake associations. The value of the lake association, again, is that you've got an entity that you can deal with, and then they go out to the individual people. So the burden on the staff at the district is reduced.
Just
But
let
with
me
the
make
other-
a comment on that, because I think the big issue here is that, and you're talking about dealing with the individual shoreline owner. I
Well,
don't think that this lake association program is going to involve the individual shoreline, or he's left out completely, because they're not going to go around and trying to recruit shoreline people to work on their lawns, their shoreline.
No, but you're gonna
I think-
educate. You know, that's
Excuse me?
the concept I had is you're
Maybe,
gonna educate. and
Maybe Jerry
evaluate.
doesn't see that happening at all. So I
Mhm.
think it's important to get this grant approved and out there and try it for a year and see what floats to the top. Because right now, we don't have a program for the individual because we've dropped that program several years ago. We have a community program and we have a lake association program. The individual is completely left out. And by working on a shoreline restoration program as part of the individual program, as well as to other groups having a chance at that, we can advance that program forward as a separate focus on the individual, which is what
Well,
we're trying to
exactly.
reach.
And that's the point I was making, is that we have our connection with the water conservation districts to handle that individual, those small lake individual issues. So I think by, you know, just looking at it on a more coordinated basis, a top level basis, we've got the tools that we need. We just need to structure that. If we want to involve those smaller lakes, that's one way to do it without burdening staff.
Manager Schmaltz, President Schmaltz,
Yes.
is the plant grant part of an individual focus, or is that something that's just completely unrelated and separate to what we're trying to kind of bring together?
Gary, can you repeat the question?
I was just wondering whether or not you had said we kind of eliminate the individual from consideration. I'm just wondering where the plant grant program exists within these programs that we're discussing.
Oh, it does? I thought it was a separate line item.
I'm asking for clarification.
I thought we discontinued that program because we weren't using much of it the last several years.
No, we have the
I don't
resident,
think it's even in the budget anymore.
Mr. President, managers, we have the residential landowner grant program, and it is the plant grant program in its current form. The plan
Okay,
states that we can do 50% up to $3,000. But again, we've had that part of the program we have not done for some time because of the low ROI of that kind of effort. So I think there are a variety of things that we could look at, and I've offered to, you know, a couple of different suggestions to different board members individually, but and I guess just to, you know, maybe try to bring this to conclusion a little bit, because it's almost 8:15 again, and I guess this is one thing that just by observation, you know, this is, while these topics are important, they've been consuming a lot of time, and they're a relatively small percentage of our overall budget. And I do want to correct maybe a couple of statements that have been made. We're not at our state goals for all of our lakes, and we still have, you know, roughly 3 years worth of phosphorus types of projects, big capital projects that are still to be implemented. And later on this evening, yet we have an agenda item for investigating another area on July Avenue, along with the farm that we expect to work on upstream of that. So there's still a lot of, from a scale standpoint, we have a lot of almost like bigger fish to fry. I know these are important, but from a process standpoint, I guess I would have probably recommended that we started it out a little bit differently. The EWM thing, you know, it's an important topic, because there are these elements of you know, what role does the district have in different areas when it's recreational. You know, we kind of wanted to stay away from things that counties or cities do from our recreation trails and things like that. But, you know, recreational on the lake is, you know, probably better suited for a watershed district, it seems. So, I mean, these are important policy level discussions for the board to have, but so I'd like to try to bifurcate the two topics a little bit, even though we're kind of saying that we're going to have them merge, that the EWM would be a topic for grant, and that's fine if the board wants to do that, but it would be nice to try to process, because the other consideration for the Lakeshore piece, I know Manager Anderson, you're trying to speak to this specifically about leveraging the Lake Association members, and I 100% support that process, because I think that's really the only way that's going to happen. But I would also like to perhaps look at making it a larger program, and we've kind of talked about what it would look like through Lessard Sam's. There's just, it'd be nice to have an application in a format ready through the budgeting process for following year, because we can have, there seems to be a strong support for programs that are Lakeshore potentially driven, and easements and things like that, that then we could, but maybe 3 different tiers or cost shares, one tier. Another tier is maybe a larger project, and the third is a permanent easement for protection. So anyway, I just kind of wanted to bring us back to that so we can attend to our other things.
Why
on
don't
the
we
agenda.
either, maybe we should ask staff then to incorporate the suggested changes they have as in the letter, and put that into the proposed budget, and we can look at it next week then, again, or next meeting. So we have it more put together than it is right now. In other words,
Okay.
they have several recommendations on what we should be including in this. A different policy for approving the request and so forth. If not, we can just postpone it to the next meeting, but I think nothing's going to get much clearer until we start adding some more value to this document in terms of where everybody wants to go. And that's
Well-
best done offline, as we've seen. We've spent a lot of time on it today. I agree with Mike. I was hoping to get it done tonight, but I guess we're not going to, so.
Well, I think we've already indicated our interest in pursuing this lake grant program. That was clear at the last meeting. I
Mhm.
haven't had a chance to vet any of the information that the staff has put forward. I don't want this to turn into a restrictive program. That was one of the goals, that it not be as restrictive as our application processes and reviews on some of the other grants in the past. So I would like to take a look at that, but I think that it's really important for us as a group to say that we are strongly in support of this Lake Association grant program, and that we move quickly on wrapping up these operational elements to launch it. And I don't think we need to vote on it, but we certainly need to have a consensus vote on it. So if people agree with this on the board, I would like to hear a yes or a no.
Manager Baki,
Yes, Manager Baki here. I'm very supportive of the Lake Association grant in a form that we can manage it and make it work for staff.
Manager Toes,
Well, I'm one who's sitting on one of these smaller lakes that doesn't have an association, so I see a value for having us included in some ways, but as Mike indicated too, on this little lake, we've benefited from the bigger picture, not so much from the smaller picture at this point. I support this going forward, but I'd like to see that the 3 tiers that you had mentioned earlier about the lake associations, the community program, and also lakeshore restoration, but keeping it within the scope of what we can afford.
Mhm.
Manager Loth.
I guess I'm still a little bit unclear in, and maybe this is because I wasn't involved in the actual creation and discussions that went along with the development of the water management plan, but I'm having a hard time seeing kind of a continuity with what information I'm being provided from the water management plan and the stuff that we're talking about taking on. I do, however, see the value in just the overall intent of trying to develop partnerships with other organizations. I'm just not sure about its current vehicle, and I just feel like things are very unclear to me, but I'm having a hard time specifying what is unclear.
Okay, thank you. I support the program, and I think that the only way we're going to find out about it is to put it out there and try it for a year. So my suggestion would be that staff go in and take the suggestions they wanted to make, incorporate them into the documents that we have so far, and then let Manager Anderson look at that and see if she's comfortable or would like to make some suggested changes, and then bring that back with her changes in red line so we can see what staff recommended versus what Manager Anderson would like to see. And then I think that would clear it up for us to decide which direction we want to go in terms of the additional additions that we want to have to cover some of the concerns that the public have and that some of us have.
I'll make that motion stated exactly that way.
Okay, we have a second? I'll second the motion. Let's do a roll call vote, Bobby, please.
Manager Schmaltz,
Aye.
Manager Anderson,
Aye.
Manager Taves,
Aye.
Manager Loth,
Can I get a read back of the motion, please?
Sure. The motion was that we'll take the existing proposal that's there, which Manager Anderson put together, which was a separate document attached to the letter. And then within the document itself, written by Administrator Kinney, there were suggestions by staff to make this document more open and more public friendly. Plus, we want to probably include Manager Tove's concern about the small person being left out. I'm not sure that's clearly spelled out in the document. But in other words, trying to patch in all the concerns that we've had up to this point in time and suggested solutions to those concerns. So we could look at a document that's got all that together on one side. And then have Manager Anderson look at it and redline anything she's not happy with. And then we would look at that document and her red line on that document at our next meeting. Does that help, Chris, or not?
It does.
Okay. Manager Anderson, is that what we agreed to?
Yes, that's how I
Okay.
recall it. Mhm.
So I'll vote aye.
Thank you.
Manager Baki,
Aye.
Okay, motion passes, and we'll look at this whenever it's ready, next meeting or the following meeting afterwards then.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Let's move along and get back on schedule here if we can. Next topic is the CR50 iron enhanced sand filter authorization. I think this is pretty direct, but Mike, are you going to cover that, or is Blaine going to cover it?
Mr. President, managers, no, we have UR staff here, Kyle
Okay,
Crawford and Mr. Celio to have any discussion, but yes, it's pretty straightforward. Go ahead.
thank you. EOR, go ahead.
Bobby, you want to bring up that memo quick? Do you have, Bobby, do you have the memo that EOR prepared by me handy?
Oh, do we all have a copy in front of us?
There it is.
Okay. There
So
we go.
as
Great.
Administrator Kinney mentioned, I'll make this pretty brief, but that being said, feel free to jump in with any questions, managers. We had brought this before the board in late April with the feasibility study, at which time the board did approve final implementation. At this point, we are at final design and looking for authorization to put the project out for public bidding from contractors. the project itself is looking at 2 large iron enhanced sand filter basins with approximately 12,700 square foot surface footprint for each one. We have managed to squeeze out estimated 97 pounds of phosphorus per year removals. If you do recall that, it's actually 10 pounds higher than what we were hoping for in the feasibility study. We were able to slightly enlarge the basins from the feasibility study after some discussions and refinements of grades and site access that did give us a little bit larger footprint for that treatment. As you can see, the construction estimate down below at the bottom of the screen, there's that table. Current construction estimate, which does include a 10% contingency, is just shy of 1.1 million. The Clean Water Fund grant is 747,400. So that would, if that does hold, that would require a district match of just over 540,000.
Kyle, can I ask a question real quickly? Has that
Certainly.
grant,
Manager,
has that
yeah, go ahead,
grant been,
Manager Anderson.
thank you. Has that grant been awarded yet?
Yes, that grant has been
Okay.
awarded.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, currently we have extended, or we did apply for an extension for that grant and receive it. So that grant is valid through, and Emily, please correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that grant is valid through July of 2023.
It's extended through actually December 31st, 2023.
Okay, we did get the full year, thank you. One thing I did want to note, if Bobby, if you could scroll down to the second page. Just with the abbreviated timeline we're working on, the biggest thing for the board to note would be that as of right now, we do not have all permits in hand. We do have the wetland permits in hand. Those are typically the longest time frame to acquire. So we did advance those immediately as part of the feasibility stage. However, the DNR and county and city permits are pending. All applications have been submitted, and we have been in contact with all agencies throughout the project. So at this point, we are not anticipating any issues with permits to be approved well before a potential construction window of this fall. But that is something I do want to make sure the board is aware of.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
I'll make the motion to approve as presented.
That's
I will second
resolution
that.
220601, just for the record.
And I will second that.
Okay, thank you, Doug. Okay, Bobby, let's do a roll call vote, please.
Manager Schmaltz,
Aye.
Manager Anderson,
Aye.
Manager Taves,
Aye.
Manager Loaf,
Aye.
Manager Baki.
Aye.
Okay, the motion carries, passes. Moving ahead then, the next item on the agenda is the presentation of the monthly treasurer's report format that's been being developed.
Mhm. Do you want to cancel that for tonight? and Push it out? I can send out
Well,
these slides.
What I'd like to do,
Yeah,
Manager Anderson, if you approve, is to take the next 2 items and
Uh-huh.
get them out of the way
sure.
and then see where we are.
Yep.
If that's okay with you,
Yeah, that's fine.
because those are action items we need to keep going to keep the watershed moving ahead.
Yep, I
So
agree.
that would mean that we would move back that next to, which should be a short one, also the Lower St. Croix, one watershed, one plan, convene meeting.
Mr. President and managers, we have Emily here yet this evening, so maybe she can do a quick introduction. And I know Manager Anderson and Manager Schmaltz are the 2 members on the Lower St. Croix from the policy committee members.
Yes, Mr. President, managers, I'll just give a quick intro. This is a biennial process. Some funding comes through the state, and one watershed, one plan group needs to decide what will happen with this funding that is dedicated to the metro portion of the Lower St. Croix. It's my understanding that the question here that will come to this meeting that's scheduled for June 22nd is, do we pool those funds with the non-metro part of the Lower St. Croix and then build a work plan with that pooled combined dollar amount? That's what was done this last round, and we're currently in that implementation of that grant. Or the alternative, as it states there, is to allocate those dollars to the partners. And it's my understanding that that was the process that occurred 4 years ago now, or I guess 3 years ago. The timing is a little confusing sometimes, but in 2019, the watershed district, along with the other metro entities, just got allocated a dollar amount, and you had to provide a budget request, and they just gave everyone an even cut of that pot of money. So that's my understanding is this meeting is that simple question of pool it, let the partnership work out a work plan, or, you know, cut it up and give it to the individuals.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I guess I have a couple comments. I've written some letters to both of you, Emily and Mike. My concern is that maybe we could put that chart up, the financial chart, Emily, that you have.
I can work on
So
pulling that up.
as she's doing that, I'll just talk ahead here. The watershed's had this money now for a couple of years or so, and so the question is, if they don't spend it by a certain date, the money's forfeited. We use the grant money, I believe. And so looking at the rate at which we're spending money, and also this money was supposed to be dedicated to in-ground projects, not to support staff, et cetera, et cetera. It was mainly to give money to watersheds and other groups to get the projects done and not to build staff and maintain overhead. So, and looking at the spending here, you know, I think a lot of these categories, A1, A3, and A10 probably don't qualify. And there's quite a bit of dollars in those areas. I don't think we're going to be able to spend that money by the end of the year. And I'm concerned that we may lose some of that grant money. Now, we have a large grant coming in, which could take a good part of it. But so if we're not going to be able to spend this money, I'm not in favor of giving the next $800,000 to the LSC and have it lost again. So that's kind of the argument I'm making right now. And I think if they don't have a good presentation at the meeting that they're going to use that money up and it's not going to be lost, we should vote no, would be my thought. Although Manager Anderson is the person that votes. I'm an alternative. So Jackie, maybe you want to comment on that? You saw my letter, I'm sure.
I don't know if I got your letter. I didn't see this chart before, but I got your emails talking about it. My position at the last meeting was not to give the Metro money to the Lower St. Croix because they would not be set to implement, as you were talking about, those bigger projects. And it takes a while to get the organizational footprint together and working, you know, toward these projects that require more. We have, I think it's close to $500,000 left over. I can't read this, it's too small, but there must be a current number from the current work plan. But that's what I call it was a substantial amount of money, more than I thought. And one of my suggestions was that we open that up to the Metro watersheds to apply for those dollars since they gave them up. And I don't know about this ending part that you're talking about. Maybe Emily can address that, but I thought there were different rules with this money going to the one watershed, one plan entities. I don't think they have that deadline. Mike's shaking his head. Is that deadline still in place for spending, Mike?
Correct. And Emily would have the specific date, but it's the same rules apply to the grants going to the Lower St. Croix as it does to any of the other grants that we've received.
Okay, and do we know when that deadline is for the current money that they're sitting on? When is that, Emily?
Yep, it's 12/31/23.
Oh, okay, so we have another year and a half.
Year.
Well, what I
Okay.
would recommend, honestly, what I would recommend is that the Lower St. Croix send out a message to all of the Metro water organizations and ask for applications for this remaining money. It can't sit there. And at least we can start staging projects that haven't been funded because of the shift to the Lower St. Croix. I'm really hesitant to give another $850,000 to the Lower St. Croix group when they don't seem to be organized enough to encourage these applications that need to come in to utilize these funds and to put together a work plan that makes sense with the guidelines that we put into place and the focuses, the prioritization that we have put into place. So again, I just don't think that it's wise to keep pumping money into something that's not really showing any real. Projects are starting to happen, but they're not really projects that are going to show us measurable outcomes. So
Thank you, Manager Anderson. Emily, do you have, you know whether those projects have to be in-ground projects, or can things like ag person salary and administration costs count towards that, those dollars? Do we have that information for sure?
Yeah, I can provide a little bit more detail on this too. I actually just this afternoon made some estimates and projections for what might be spent, how that remaining 600,000 could be spent. So everything that you see on this page is eligible for watershed-based implementation funding. You know, the administration and everything, it's kind of just like our Clean Water Fund grants. We put the majority of the grant dollars toward actual construction, but we are allowed to use grant funds for, you know, grant reporting, the engineering, the project development, landowner outreach, things like that. So all of this is eligible. And
what about hiring educational people?
Yep, this education and outreach is an eligible element, and there are education and outreach goals and objectives in that Lower St. Croix implementation plan. So it does tie back to that.
I think that area is actually doing quite well. I think they're very organized. They have very dedicated plans. I think that, you know, what we need to work with them on is making sure that it's spread out over time. You know, obviously they're concentrating on that really high load area up in the north Chisago County area. So I get that with their agricultural outreach, but I mean, if you look at their program, they just sent out a program bulletin here about the next couple of months of activities. They've got it together. I'm very happy with how that's working.
Okay, so then do we want to vote for it then, or let's have Emily send us that information and then we can decide what you want to do, I guess. Or should we have the board vote on it? We have to do that, don't we? Or do we have the freedom to make our mind up?
We should go to these meetings with the board's approval. Right. One thing I wanted to say though is that if this money is going to be sitting around, I think we need to polish up our grant applications to the Lower St. Croix. We haven't really asked for much, but and we're not in their priority zone except for the in-lake analysis for Forest Lake. But we certainly have, especially with these numbers of sediment load coming out of our 2021 monitoring report, we are contributing a tremendous amount of sediment into the Lower St. Croix. And so, or the Sunrise, excuse me, making its way to the Lower St. Croix. So I think any project that deals with that on Comfort Lake and Little Comfort Lake, because we're the end of the watershed, are ideal candidates to lower that load. And it's better than having the money sitting around not doing anything. So I would be thinking about that, staff, as how can we tap into this money?
Okay, getting back to the voting then, do we want to vote for or against it, Jackie?
Well, like I said, I'd like to see what their plans are, and if Emily can check on whether or not we qualify, because we don't have stated projects except for the loading in Forest Lake. What could we access those funds with in our current plan? I'd like to know that. Mm-hmm.
I could provide an update on that right now if you'd like.
So the
writing
next
will be
meeting,
good.
the next
Yeah.
meeting is the 20th of June though, isn't it? Or is it July?
The convene meeting is June 22nd. Our next board meeting is the 23rd.
Yeah.
So we have to decide tonight then.
Mm-hmm. Yes, what's the quick answer to that, Emily? If you have it off the top of your head, go ahead.
We have been and will tap into these funds. We just submitted a proposal for just over 300,000 to of watershed-based implementation funds from the wetland restoration task to go toward the Sunrise River tax forfeit wetland restoration. Recall that construction was a lot more expensive than we anticipated years ago when we applied for the Clean Water Fund grant. And so that grant that we already have doesn't go quite as far as we thought it would. So to cover a little bit of that gap, we've requested some of these watershed-based funds. And so that would take up half of the remaining encumbered balance. There's about 600,000 that isn't encumbered yet. If approved, we would take up half of that. There's another few projects that are in the works right now that I think really could feasibly be spent up within the next year and a half. Now that a lot of the first year, a lot of time and energy was put into the processes to interview, post-interview and hire now this shared educator and the ag outreach person, Barbara and Jen. And now that they've just recently started, like Manager Anderson mentioned, they are up and running and doing a lot in that education bulletin. There's a lot going on. And so I think the idea is that, and we've got these processes in place, there's a lot of administration input at the beginning. And so I think now that we've figured out how we're going to do it, because there isn't a very clear, Bowser doesn't tell you exactly how to set these things in place. It's kind of, we've had to figure it out. And now that it's in place, I would expect that the group can spend these funds.
Okay. Well, I feel more confident with that update, Steve, than I did before. And I think that the convene meeting in the Metro is going to go with passing it into the Lower St. Croix again. I mean, that's just the reality
I'm
of life.
sure that's going to be the same way unless we try to change it, but.
I think we're beating our head against a brick wall. This has been in motion for 10 years planning, so we're not going to stop it.
So let's recommend that we vote for it then. The board,
Yes.
we need a motion on that or do?
Consensus is fine, I think. Is there any opposition to voting yes from the board?
Chair Schmaltz, this is Manager Baki.
Yes, Manager Baki, go ahead.
I'd like to abstain on this vote until I can get my head around this whole initiative. Sorry about that. I just can't vote either way.
That's fine. It's a complicated situation, so. Okay, anybody else? Sounds like we have 4, so that should give us the direction to support it. Okay, thank you. Manager Anderson, I guess you can indulge me one more thing here. Well, we've got to do the proposed addition for the July Avenue investigation scope of work. This is pretty straightforward also, should go quickly, I hope. Mike, who's gonna cover that?
Mr. President, managers. Yes, we have a scope of work and UR is put together. This is related to the July Avenue. There's some wetlands downstream of this ag site that we've been monitoring in the past. And so what we would look to do is take some samples in the similar way that we have in other wetlands that we've rehabilitated. UR is here as well if you have any more questions.
Just a little background, it would be helpful, I think. Could we get a little background on this?
Along July Avenue is downstream of this feedlot. There are a series of wetlands that have potentially been impacted by the continuous discharge of nutrients from the feedlot. So as a part of the holistic management of that drainage area, in addition to working with the landowner to change the feedlot. We want to investigate to see if these wetlands are also legacy loads.
Mhm. Well, I fully support this. I, lived with this for years now, and there was a discernible difference in the lake quality when this started a number of years ago. And it's been a while, probably 25 years ago already, but I will make the motion as it is presented to proceed.
That would be approving task 1 through 3 of the scope of work to initiate
Mhm.
soil sample collections at the July Avenue wetlands.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we have a second.
I will second that. Manager Taves.
Thank you, Manager Taves. Bobby, can we do a roll call vote?
Manager Schmaltz,
Aye.
Manager Anderson,
Aye.
Manager Taves,
Aye.
Manager Loth,
Aye.
Manager Baki.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Mike, let me ask you an opinion here. We've got another item on the agenda, district office space visioning. Is ISG with us tonight? And is this something we need to probably at least get exposed to the board rather than waiting another 2 weeks before we get back to the treasurer's report?
Mr. President and managers, there's 2 scopes in the board packet. And I guess they have the scopes running somewhat in parallel. But I think that this first scope that they have in terms of, which would be the first motion to address some of the strategic planning for office education outreach space. I think that one is from my perspective, it would make sense to start with that and to start moving on that. And then as that gets closer to the end, then we could potentially start with the second scope. It would also allow the staff more time to collect information that was requested at the last meeting for getting some, sort of diagrams and square footage and other photos or videos or things like that of other such facilities for the board to review. But the strategic planning part, I feel could start right away, but they are not here this evening. So.
Yeah, I think that there's probably an opportunity for questions on this, but I think I agree with Mike that we can at least start with the first part, and then maybe at the next meeting, we can have them come and we can ask any questions you have on the strategic part, as well as then the second part, which is basically the scope of work on looking at the design and so forth. Because it's only going to move ahead 2 weeks, and that's not a lot of time, so we'll be able to catch up really quickly if we have it at our next meeting.
Yeah.
Are you comfortable with that, Mike?
Yes, I was just going to say, we've been talking about this for a long time. We can wait another 2 weeks and get them there and let the board
Well, at least we
digest.
get them started anyway, and we get the ball rolling. So does anybody have any quick questions? If not, we can try to address this at the next meeting, but at least get it approved tonight. The first number 1 approved tonight. Or if you think we're trying to push this through, answer your questions, and we'll try to accommodate any concerns you have at this time.
Can you blow that up a bit, Bobby, on your screen? I just want to see that first motion. Thank you. That's pretty routine. I'll make the number 1 motion before us.
I'll second.
Okay, Manager Loth seconded. Bobby, well, let's do a roll call vote, please.
Manager Schmaltz,
Aye.
Manager Anderson,
Aye.
Manager Taves,
Aye.
Manager Loth,
Aye.
Manager Baki.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes, and just as a refresher then, at the next meeting, we'll have an opportunity to ask questions about the motion that just passed. for any clarification, and then also maybe ask questions about the second motion that will be coming up at the next meeting. Excuse me. Okay, thank you. Okay, we've got a few minutes here. Let's move on ahead then back to the monthly treasurer's report format, and we at least have a description of that
Sure.
tonight. That'd be great.
Yeah, I'm going to do this briefly. Ted is here from the committee. I appreciate that. I met with him yesterday. Doug could not make our meeting last week, which didn't really matter because I had to cancel it. I had a dental emergency that I had to take care of right away, and it happened about 10 minutes after 1, and the meeting was to start at 1:30. So apologize for that. But let me just pull this up. The purpose was to review an update of the district's monthly reports so that they're a little bit more transparent for the public and for new managers in particular, to follow the information flow. And so there were a number of them, number of different examples that I brought the first one to our accountant, and it was MAWDS, the Minnesota Association of Watershed Districts, 1-page expense and income statement, which was pretty easy to read. And it ends up that our format is pretty close to that. And the one from Rice Creek, she thought was really close. And she put that into that format, but I don't think her spacing was right. It came out really bad when she sent off the early numbers. And so what we did is look at it more carefully and how we really got the same information on all of these different formats, but what's the easiest way to present it to the board? And we ended up with just making modifications to our existing one. So if we can move on to the next slide. And I did mention Ted, Doug Taves is on the committee as well. I shouldn't say committee, the work group. Can we move on to the next page in the workbook? That would be number 2, page number 2. There we go. And as you can, if you can bring it up as fast as you, or yeah, as much as you can, that would be great. Everything in red is just new stuff. One of the things that we looked at, or this is the current one, I'm sorry, this is the current one. I think this is labeled wrong, but the current format is pretty close to what this is showing. We added a fund transfer column so that we could track the fund transfers that come out of the grants primarily and offset that. We don't have that on an ongoing basis. That needs more development with talking with Emily and Mike. So this is still in a proposal standpoint. If we move over to the right or expand this somehow, you'll see that we added current budget balance and percent of budget. This doesn't look right. This just looks like it's the current one. But we have 2021. Yeah, I don't know what this is. This isn't is this what you got from me today? No, this is the current. This is not what I sent to you. Huh. Did you get the email that I sent to you this afternoon, Bobby? About 4:30, so? Okay, it should be right in this one. Thank you. Go to the next one then. The ME expense income statement. That's the month end. Just pull it up from the bottom. There you go. Yeah, highlight this one. Here we go. This is right. Okay, so everything in red is new, and these are just modifications to an existing format that we've seen before. We did have some recommendations for changing some of these line items that particularly in the board administration area and the administration office area, just because it aligned better with our histories. Ted is a retired CFO, I think, for nonprofits. think we mentioned that before. And I've had a lot of high level experience with financials at the executive level in business. And then I owned my own business for 20 years or so. So we're used to this kind of thing. And so that grouping isn't critical except for understanding where that expense is truly coming from, which becomes important, over time. The current percent of budget column, I believe, is new. And then the 2021 look back, one of our new managers asked for that 1 year look back. So we added that. And then the 21% of year to date, just to compare what the prior year was to what the current year is. If you go down to the bottom, okay, the current fund cash balance. This was something that was very confusing, especially for new people. And so adding that cash, just the one word, several other districts do it this way. It's showing you what your available cash balance is. And so if you go down to this bottom chart, where you have general administration fund, debt service fund, program and project implementation fund. This is information that was on our other documents or current documents. But what becomes very clear is that we're dealing in May, this is the May report, over to the second one from the right column there, it's the cash fund balance. That's what's available in our accessible funds area before transfers. So that's why that little asterisk was added, because we're looking at the transfers that have to occur to meet the current obligations. And so everything's a month behind. And so that helps make that a little bit more transparent. Our accountant liked this as well. Let's go to the next one. So we're looking at the May report, but it's for April again. So if we go all the way up, show as much as you can. These are all of our, at the top is income that comes in. And as we talked about for the first 6 months of the year, the income is pretty sparse. And so we're living off of reserves and carryovers from the prior year. We are a little tight this year, but when we get to the budget, I don't know if we're going to talk about that tonight or not, but when we get to the budget, you'll see that the increase that we did to the revenue sources for 2022, hopefully are going to get us back into that position that we were in before, where we had sufficient monies to cover the 6 months without this, this drain. The other thing, of course, is we've got the loan. Can you pull that up a little bit as I talk, Bobby? Thank you. Thank you. Okay, go to the next bracket section for the expenses for the period. Again, this is the same format that all districts use. It's just a listing of the expenses for the period, which is in this case, April. And you can show that it's got a check number on it. So the check register is there. And this is a good way to do it because this is on hold until it gets approved by the board. And then the checks are performed. We've never had a problem with any checks having to be pulled for further documentation. So that's good. Staff is good at verifying the invoices with the work being done. If you can go back down now to electronic payments, this is something new that Nancy had started doing probably at staff's request, and that's to show the vendors who've gone to electronic transfer for payments, which of course makes the process much more efficient. And then if you go down to that last box, this is where, again, we're looking at the funds. And again, it's transparent and where we're at and what kind of additional funding we need to meet the obligations. Now, in this month, looks like we had the transfer didn't have to be quite as big. So if you go to the last one, which is the balance sheet, this is pretty standard. It didn't have a lot of things. What we found though is this checking from Midwest One. It's not an active account, but it has this 1161 balance, which is a little over almost to a million, or excuse me, 1,002. But that we recommend closing. I'll talk to Mike about that, the protocol. The go down further, please, until you see the next highlight. Okay, this is the standard one that you've been getting. What we're asking is for that deferred revenue. This is where the grant monies all fall into. And so we ask that there be a breakout detail by grant as a subcategory. So not a new, it might even be over here on the right so that we don't have to go to 2 pages. But we just ask for that. So the board has a really good handle on how many of these grant projects we have in the hopper at any one time. And the net income, this gets back to that question about the comment I made about the budget that we'll see in the 2023 budget, that we made significant increases to support the first 6 months of the year. So we don't look at these negatives.
Excuse me.
We want to have about
Manager Anderson.
50%. Yeah.
Question.
Yeah.
We're not changing the 23 budget planning process, are we? No.
No.
Because-
No.
Because I don't want any changes to that made, because that's pretty much standard and it's a multi-year look.
Well-
And so I don't want to spend any additional money trying to make any changes. If you have any suggestions, just bring them to the board and we will look at it verbally and decide what we have to do.
You worry about
Because
things.
we
that
have
don't-
a breakout detail for deferred revenue already.
Yeah.
in
But not on the
back.
balance sheet, not on an ongoing basis on the balance sheet. And it's
But
very
all
easy.
you have to do is
to-
go look at one of our 8 pages and we have it there, if you want to look at the
Well-
detail.
Yeah,
So, okay.
there's nothing changing on the, we've been working for years to get that budget process smooth. And it is about as smooth as we can get it. We have to wait for the information to come in on the estimated market value, so we can't move too much forward on that. But anyway, this is just an overview for you. We can send this, Bobby can send this to you, this presentation, so that you can look at it more carefully, see if it satisfies what you were after, and then we can discuss it at the next meeting. But everything's going to stay on the same format until the board approves. Like I said, this is more tweaking than it is a transformation. But the tweaking is to get at the information so that it's transparent for you.
Manager Anderson, when was this sent to Bobby? Was this sent today?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just finished.
Well,
I just
I think
finished
all of us
talking.
I spent about an hour and a half going through 18 pages of stuff that you sent out last meeting. And I thought that's what we were going to review at this meeting. So I think
No.
just for future meetings, we're only going to review what was sent out on Friday before the meeting.
Yeah, that's
So,
fine.
The next time okay, so
Well, that
because, I
last,
haven't had a chance to even see this.
yeah.
And it's very
I
difficult
know.
to review something when you don't have a chance to look at it. So,
Well, I had some major dental surgery going on, so that kind of sidetracked me a little bit. But that packet that you got before was not meant to be shared. It was a preliminary review, and somehow it got out, I think, to you, and all kinds of concerns were raised. And it was actually just a preliminary step to get forward. But here we are. This is I think what's again important is that the new managers in particular look at this and make sure that it satisfies what they wanted to see in more detail. And it's tweaking. It's not a transformational change in the way the information's been presented. Ted, is there anything you'd like to say?
I think you pretty much covered it at this point. So it's probably getting feedback from the managers on does this meet their needs?
Okay, thank you.
just one point of clarification, the new format is 18 pages long. Our existing format is 8 pages or 7 pages long. So I think it's important that the managers look at the existing format against the new format like I did and see how much changes there is and whether those changes merit an extra 11 pages. So,
but that's where you're incorrect. That's that preliminary information that you got that was not ready to share. That was just to review the Rice Creek format. And there are some positives to what they do, but there are other reasons behind why that's not good for us. this is the monthly financial report that everybody will be getting. These 4 pages, excuse me, 1, 2, 3, yeah, 4 pages. The intro
Okay,
won't be
good.
part
That's-
of it.
That's great. That's a much improved shortening of it. So I'm glad to see that, Manager Henderson. So
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah,
President
Okay,
Schmaltz,
so we'll be looking forward to looking at this again whenever we have it in time for the next meeting. So that will be
Well,
great. Is there any
this-
comments or questions people want to make before we move on?
President Schmaltz, I have a quick one.
Sure.
Is it possible to get side by sides of old and new versus all of the new stuff and all of the old stuff, just for comparison purposes for the new managers?
And that was sent to you actually in your packet that you have there right now. There's the new proposed format, which is 18 pages, and then there's a current format, which is 7 pages. So that 7-page current format is what we've been operating on since we've been.
the
you know,
new,
since we've been in
let
business.
me correct you again. There is no new format with 18 pages. That was to be
No, I said
reviewed. Yeah, so
But I was just
managers should
referencing
not
what it
have
was sent to
gotten,
him.
managers should not have gotten that 18-page look at the Rice Creek format. That should never have gone out. This is the proposed changes for our existing
Okay.
monthly financial reports. It's 4 pages. And it's meant to be the top level look on a monthly basis of the critical information that managers need to understand where our cash position, where our fund positions, and what bills we have to pay every month.
Can we also receive directly what pages correspond from the new report to the old report?
Yes, well, you have that already. Pull up your last report that you got in May, and that's for April, and that's going to mirror the information that's in this document. It's not going to vary a lot. You can see just from going through these, you're not as familiar with them, of course, but other than a couple of columns on the month-end expense income statement and some changes on the balance sheet for additional info, there's not a lot of change here. So take a look at it.
Okay, we'll make sure
compare
that
it to
gets
your
sent
last
out.
month's packet.
So make that sure that gets sent out, and we'll also send you a copy of the one that so you won't have to print it out.
Don't send that 18-page one to them.
No, I'm not.
Okay.
Once we have what you have here, we'll send that out with our normal 4 pages or 5 pages, whatever we send out.
Yeah, but again, that's in their last month's. They can go online and pull that off of the May
Right.
26th, I think. Because it's always part of the last month's meeting, the second meeting of the month is the treasurer's report.
Okay, if not, let's move on.
Thank you,
I
Bobby.
think I think we're now moving into project update, which we have a few slides on.
Mr. President and managers, you have the 2023 draft budget.
Oh, that's right.
still
I'm sorry.
On the agenda. I don't know how much of it you want to take on, but Emily has been waiting. So at least give a little synopsis on it.
Emily, go ahead. Sorry.
That's okay. Given the time, I'll keep it quick. I had posted the slides in advance so people can look at those for some of the highlights. Just wanted to give the total proposed expense budget of 4.9 million. It's a bit higher than the watershed management plan, largely due to a few projects that we've got coming in. County Road 50, Aaron Enhanced Sand Filter, which we just had on the agenda today, the tax forfeit wetland restoration, and this potential project that could come through, and we could talk more details of it later, but potentially alum treatments in Forest Lake. We really think that could be feasible by next fall. And so we can get into that a little bit more later. So really, it's a lot of these large, big water quality improvement projects are driving up that budget. But there is also a lot of smaller line items that do add up, such as the community grant program, which is on the smaller scale, but we've got a lot of different things going on. So it does add up. So that being said, I think that we can get in a good amount of grant revenues. Like we talked about the watershed-based implementation funding, of course, the Clean Water Fund, several other grant sources. And so that grant amount is what we have estimated is actually earned grant revenue. So not the unearned grant revenue that is in the bank account, but you can't really touch it. That will actually be earned that year by those big projects. We had recommended, we think under the scenario, we could keep the levy as it currently is. That is the proposed scenario here. Again, once we have the market values, we can get into that more. And then this does include requesting an additional $1 million in the zero interest Clean Water Partnership loan. Those are kind of the big three legs of the revenues for that next year's budget. I think I'll leave it at that for now, and I'll take any questions, or if managers want to reach out later and I can provide more details and a bigger presentation at a future meeting. We had put it on, so we were proposing to skip it on the 23rd and discuss the budget again at our meeting on July 14th. So the board might want to discuss that given the timing here.
Yeah, I
Well-
think you did a very good job, Emily. I would encourage the managers to take the time to go through those sheets, because it's a lot of good information. And once you learn that we got three very basic areas: administration, programs, and projects. And then we have a backup on the grants, and then some cash flow sheets at the end. But it's a very nice summary of how we're going to spend our money next year. And I think we need to all look at that and see how comfortable we are with it. So maybe we can begin to discuss. And if you have any concerns or questions, I would encourage you to send them to Emily, because she can be very helpful in explaining what those are. You'll see what projects we're going to be working on next year, for lake projects and stream projects and groundwater, et cetera. And it's not as complicated as it may look. We just have, actually, we only have 2 big projects next year. The rest are pretty small, so.
Yeah, I would just ask that you include the treasurer in this development, next time around, but it's been enhanced over the years so that it can be much more streamlined and automatic, and there are some basic level information that we need to finalize all of this, and projects is one of them. We have to talk about staff needs, potential staff, any increases that we're looking at or decreases in that kind of funding. So there are some specific background questions that maybe you've answered. I haven't gone through the whole document here, but I would like to chat with you about that kind of thing. And then the other thing we need, of course, are all the estimated market values and the reports from the county on increases in estimated market values.
Chair Schmaltz, Manager Baki.
Yes. Go ahead, Manager.
Quick question for Emily. I see the Lessard Sams grant money is in the budget. Has that grant been submitted?
Yes, we did submit for a $4.5 million grant through Lessard Sams. It's hard to say that would be a big swing in the revenue budget if we put that full 4.5. So I didn't include all of that as guaranteed next year, just a portion, because you never really know how it's going to shake out. A lot of times I've seen that they do come in lower. Not sure exactly how much. So I don't have that full 4.5 factored into the revenues, but just a smaller chunk just to be conservative.
Dave, if you go back to the grant sheets, they're very helpful in the back. You'll see where Emily's actually forecasted about 1/3 of the 2.2 million grants as being already in. And then the others are down below, which we're waiting to get answers, and then just a probability estimate. But there is some risk there. We only got 1/3 of it in the, guaranteed for sure. There's 2/3 that has to still come in, but if you go through the sheets, you'll be able to pick that kind of stuff up and begin to see what's happening. So very helpful, I think. Any other questions? If not, I think we can we'll see how our agenda looks next week. And if we have some time, maybe we can spend a little time on this budget again. Because we do have 3 new managers and it's tough when you first go through it, I think.
Or take it to a workshop type of meeting where you can dedicate yourself to this one thing.
Right. But, okay, if not, then.
President Schmaltz?
Yeah.
If I may just add one quick correction in looking at this memo here, I'm going to revise and repost under revenues, it says estimated 2022. That's of course 2023. Just got past me. So that'll be reposted, but in case anyone was wondering that in the meantime.
Okay, thank you. Okay, no other questions. Let's move on. I think the last time was project updates.
Yeah, Mr. President, managers, Blaine is off this evening, so I'll cover these. So if we can go to the next one, please. So the Bone Lake Northeast Wetland Project. So they came in and hydroseeded that area. So we're largely complete with that area around the wetland complex itself. There's a little more work to do in the field, and I've been working with both Aiden and Blaine on potentially spreading that out a little bit, because I went out to inspect it a few weeks ago, and the amount of material was just thicker than we anticipated, and it would be difficult to really work in and get reseeded. So I wanted to see if we can't get it distributed a little bit more. Next, please. This is the County Road 50 iron handstand filter, and the board just authorized that to go out to bid. Next, please. Interfluve, this is the firm that we hired to look at the School Lake, the Little Comfort channel area. They've been out and they've done the field investigation work, and they will be working on developing 2 concepts for the district to consider. Next, please. So the tax forfeit property, which I think we're going to try to rename to be the Highway 61 Sunrise River project, for our open house, and that is going to be held June 22nd. But other than that, we're continuing to progress toward a construction project this next winter. Next, please. The Moody Capstone, we're continuing to do the landowner outreach. We have been able to make contact with a couple of landowners that we've had difficulty reaching, I guess for, well, probably a year or more, at least on one case. So we're making progress in that regard. Next, please.
Could I ask a question about this one? Just where does the capstone come in? What does that signify?
So for Moody Lake, our goal for the total reduction goal, we're about 98% or so. We're not quite there. We're 95. I can't remember the exact number, but so we were looking to do a number of smaller projects that, with the alum treatment already completed, the more that we can protect that treatment from being covered up from nutrients, sediment, etc., the longer it will last. So that's the overall objective of these group of smaller projects.
Okay.
All right, for the WJD6 Western Tributary, this is along Scandia Trail, Highway 97. And so maybe the status update here is that the grant plan has been completed. This is one of our newer grants, and the grant dollars have been released to the district. And we're continuing to, with our landowner outreach, it's one singular landowner. We're trying to come to an agreement on the utilization of that. And but otherwise that could potentially be another winter project, maybe like the Northeast one where we do it in the first year of the receiving the dollars. Next, please. And there we are.
Good, thank you. I just wanted to make one comment and a request to the board. Mike and I was talking, and I think these board updates are very helpful. We've been focusing mainly on construction projects, which are big projects that we have to worry about. But since we have a new board members, we're thinking of actually varying things out. So for example, we might have Aiden come in and talk about the ag program. Or if you guys want to know more about permitting, you could ask maybe to do 10 minutes on permitting. You know, just little snippets of some of the major programs we have, just to worked in with the construction projects we got to help you get up to speed on what some of these things are and what they're about. And it only takes 8 to 10 minutes, but I think it can be very helpful if we do a little bit at each meeting. So if you feel comfortable with that, let me know, and we can maybe next meeting try to you know, put in maybe the ag program or permitting, or if you have a special interest, just drop Mike a note. Any feedback on that thought?
I like the idea.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Okay, good.
Can
We'll
we
try
go
it
back to
next
that
couple
one
meetings.
can we go back to that last slide for just a minute? This wetland enhancement project, can you just point out again where this is located, and is this on private land or is it part of the JD6? I see the western tributary.
It is private. It is private land. This is Highway 97. So this is in close proximity to Thames Marina on the south side of Third Lake.
Oh, sure. Okay, good. That
So,
helps. Yeah, that helps. So is this where the extra 10 pounds of phosphorus reduction is coming from? I mean, that number went from 85, I think, to 90 something in the presentation tonight, from last month to this month. Is that where part of that's coming from? And is it benefiting that individual property or the ditch system itself?
So this western, during the diagnostic monitoring for Forest Lake, the western tributary here of JD6 had a high concentration. It didn't necessarily have a high volume, but it was a high concentration. So relatively still notable load. And through this one project, it'll be similar to excuse me, a Bixby style park project where like tax forfeit property. Or we'll divert the water over and, you know, through the wetland complex. So it gives some more residence time and really restore the functionality of the wetland itself.
Yeah, and that's really close to the lake too. So
right, and it is all on one singular property owner's land.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to board direction then. Mr. Holman, what do we have in the way of follow-up?
Mr. Chair, just several details. One is that staff should proceed to identify projects that are ready to go that reduce load to the St. Croix and can be put before the 1W1P group. There was some discussion after that with Emily speaking to that. Then Bobby was asked to send the new monthly balance sheet format out to the managers for review. Manager Anderson asked that she, as treasurer, be involved in the next round of staff's advancing of the budget process, and then staff will expand the project update to start incorporating programs.
Any other suggestions that we may have missed? Okay, thank you. Then we're down to adjourning. I'll need a motion for adjournment.
I'll move adjournment.
Second.
I'll second. Manager Baki.
Thank you, Manager Baki. Bobby, you want to do a roll call vote? Before we do that, I just want to apologize. I lost control of the meeting here for the Eurasian Water Milfoil and the Lake Association grants. I was hoping to get that through today, so I did spend too much time on it, and that's why we're running late here, so I apologize for that. Bobby, go ahead.
Manager Schmaltz,
Aye.
Manager Anderson,
Aye.
Manager Taves,
Aye.
Manager Lowe,
Aye.
Manager Baki.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. We're adjourned. Thank you all for coming and for your input tonight.
Thank you.